The opinions expressed by tonight's guest do not represent the opinions or position of Spaced Out Radio, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with SOR Media. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh man, there's got to be something to listen to on this dial.
This message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, multiple unidentified objects were confirmed to have entered Earth's atmosphere. It is speculated that these objects are of extraterrestrial origin. The broadcast will quiet at this time for your safety.
Welcome to Spaced Out Saturdays, as we light the void with Joe Root on Spaced Out Radio.
Told all the lies to myself while sleepwalking through it all.
You can follow Joe on Twitter at Lighting the Void, on Facebook at Lighting the Void, and you can call into tonight's show at 501-777-5631. You can also follow Joe at spacedoutradio.com.
We're sorry. Your call cannot be completed as done.
Remain seated, please. Permanecer sentados, por favor.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Why don't you talk into the microphone? I got a backup mic right here. Check 1, 2. Testing, testing. Yeah, they both working, and guess what? They don't like no feedback. What's up?
Now, let's fire the show up and light the void on Spaced Out Saturdays with your host, Joe Root.
Broadcasting from the Mossy Creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas, I'm Joe Root, and this is Spaced Out Saturday. I'm your humble host, master of ceremonies, and it's good to have you with us. Great to be here. It's a pretty cool night here in Arkansas on this Saturday, April 7th on into the 8th. Thank you all for joining us, wherever you're listening from, on the web or on our affiliate stations. Let's go ahead and welcome those guys in. WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Newnan, Georgia, home of the Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, and The Fringe FM. We rock out every night with Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy. Bumblefoot is the official sound of Spaced Out Radio. Also, you can check us out on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. And you can follow me on Twitter at Lighting the Void as well. You can also hear us on iHeartRadio in the USA. Tune us in on TuneIn and download our shows from iTunes. And, of course, the website is spacedoutradio.com. And if you go to patreon.com for as low as $1 a month, you can become a patron of Spaced Out Radio. Now, if you want to take part in the show, just sign into one of our chat rooms on Spreaker, on the UPRN chat room, and on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Or if you're on Twitter, just go to hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and I'll get to your questions in there as well. The call-in number for tonight is 501-777-5631. That's 501-777-5631. And if you head over to the website for just $5 a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. And as of right now, you can go to the Spaced Out Radio store, pick up a T-shirt, poster, or a sticker. We also have the Encounter online that deals with everything paranormal. You can check out the latest blog post there as well. And if you've had an experience you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. And Tim Doyle from UFO Seekers and Leslie Mitchell Clark's Contact TV also has some great video viewing there as well. All right. So, tonight, A very special guest is going to be joining us, and I want to say a couple of things about this person real quick. You know, my fascination is with ufology and the occult and also conspiracy, and I believe that it all tangles together. And the thing about it is as I've studied these people, such as Manly P. Hall, all of the old, great wise people in all their books, what I'm finding out is there are very few initiates in this world, what I would call initiates. Someone that's willing to learn wisdom to a point of no return. And after they learn this wisdom and after they become self-empowered, then there's even fewer people who will dedicate their life and consecrate their life to the greater of humanity, however you do it. And I believe Ryan Gable is one of those people. Now, Ryan Gable is the host of Secret Teachings radio show and author of Grand Illusions, Slaves to Perception, False Prophets and the Lovers of Children, The Persistent Illusion, The Technological Elixir, and Food Philosophy. He's a hard-hitting radio host with nothing but the truth in mind, and he's been removed from some networks, some pretty notable networks, for talking about certain subjects that he felt at all costs should be broadcasted to his audience. Now, he's rising fast in the digital broadcasting world, and he now airs on the Fringe FM and Late Night in the Midlands every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific. So if you're interested in the mystery schools, esoteric knowledge, ufology, just all-around bottom-line search for truth, you should definitely read his books and listen to his show. Now, after I discovered Ryan's show, I became hooked on his material, and I knew that I had to talk to him. So tonight, it's going to be the second time he came on the show. Last time he jumped on for a little bit when Leo Zagami was here. But we're going to go further down the rabbit hole with Ryan Gable. Now, a little bit more about him. He's also a film school graduate with a Bachelor's of Science degree in film and audio production. He's a 5-year-plus radio host, producer, manager, writer, editor, and promotions director for his radio show, The Secret Teachings. And he's also an author, like I said. You're going to want to stay focused and listen to this one intently, guys. And you can also visit his website at www.thesecretteachings.info. Ryan, welcome back to Spaced Out Saturday. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate the introduction.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I catch your show as much as I possibly can. You know, sometimes I conk out from work, but I always, if I miss it, then I go back and I re-listen. And I got to say, man, there's few people out there that are, you know, really putting it to the sticks, you know, poking the bear. You know, I'm not saying everybody doesn't do that. Obviously, it's safe to go down the middle of the road on the radio, but you're on a mission, man, and I can really respect that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I try to poke all the bears. Try to poke as many bears as I can as often as possible, not because I'm trying to incite the bear, but because I think sometimes that bear needs to be poked if other people won't poke it.
Yeah, sure, and I totally agree with that. There's hosts out there, and I don't want to say any names or anything, but they do everything in their power to discredit other hosts, and that's their platform, right? Pushing other people down to build themselves up. Yours is quite different. You're just trying to bring awareness, and sometimes you got to get a little brutal with the truth, just so people can kind of wake up. But it's never been about stepping on people. It's just about finding out the truth in these matters, and you're heavily researched into the occult, and that I can respect as well. And we've always tried to bring all this stuff together, and I think as of late, it's starting to get kind of obvious that ufology, the occult, the conspiracy, just like Jim Marr said, it's all in there.
It absolutely is. And in fact, when you start looking at the world through each lens in your process of personal initiation, and I don't like to necessarily use those words just to immediately start a show, because if you think of the word initiation, or if you think of a word like magic, or if you think of a word especially like sorcery, people tend to have an immediate negative reaction, and I was also one of those people until I studied those topics and got a better understanding, as you yourself do, of what those subjects actually mean. And there are reasons for which those topics, especially relating to magic, are kept secret or are purposely confused, or there are what I call symbolic scarecrows that are utilized, and symbolic scarecrows could mean symbols as well, that are utilized to prevent people from accessing information that is very powerful and could be utilized for very dangerous purposes. And I did a show actually today the secret teachings today, or the 7th, about that very subject, about black magic, about sorcery, and about what I see as an overall degenerate agenda. And I see this agenda around the world. I'm not saying that it's an agenda that's political. It's not an agenda that's religious. I think it transcends religion. I think it transcends politics. There's no sense of atheism to it per se. There's no sense of anarchism to it per se. There's no label to it per se. The only identification I could probably give it is one of selfishness, one of black magic, one of sorcery, one of where people are abusing the laws of nature, which could be associated with the laws of God, or abusing God himself, if you will, or insulting God in some way, shape, or form in order to bring about for themselves personal gain, personal benefits of some type, in order to obtain and maintain absolutely power of an incredible nature, to obtain and maintain wealth, and all of those things that go along with power and wealth. And people take natural laws, pervert them, distort them, and alter them for personal gain. And this is a form of black magic, as opposed to the very types of magic all of us perform every single day, perhaps in preserving those laws of nature. And we would call this white magic. There is a form of magic in between black and white, which is gray, where there's a debate whether or not something that is done for the self is necessarily selfish or selfless, as you would call it, black or white. But nevertheless, my point is, most of us practice magic every single day. And most of us, even if we don't know it, probably practice a little bit of white, a little bit of gray, and a little bit of black. But the people that practice black magic on the level that I'm discussing are the people that, and these are not people that operate behind the scenes per se. This is not some global conspiracy, some new world order, some hashtag or some identification, some label we can apply to it. There's a lot of generalities here, but these are people that we can name. And I believe that if you, for example, Joe, if you look at a woman who's pregnant, let's say, or if a woman who is ovulating, just biologically, you can read this in a lot of like science books. Most women tend to have a glow about them. And men do too. I mean, all human beings do. If you're really happy, some people have a glow about themselves. They have a glimmer in the eye. But when somebody does something that's very wrong, that's very dark, that's very disturbing, they don't have that glimmer in their eye. Their eyes are either blacked or kind of hollow. It doesn't look like anybody's home. They have a strange energy to them. They have a strange presence. Even if you're not in the room with that person, if that person appears on TV, they give you a really bad feeling. And right. Some of these people you could name, like I'll give you an example of a Henry Kissinger, a George Soros, a Hillary Clinton. Some of these people physically look like they are deteriorating. And it's not because of stress, I don't think. I think it's because of the practices that they are involved in. And I don't mean necessarily that they're slaughtering some animal for some satanic sacrifice, although that does happen. But the practices they're involved in, I believe, drain their energy because they use energy to harm other people. And in black magic, one harms him or herself in order to bring harm to others.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, like you say, if I tell someone to have a nice day, that's kind of like a magic spell. My will is that person is to have a nice day. But let's look at it on the other end. If I say, geez, that person really gets on my nerves. I wish they'd go play in traffic. Is that a spell? Is that a black magic spell?
It could be if you tell that to the person and they took it to heart and maybe they started to think that they should go play in traffic per se. And so they think they should go play in traffic. They start to feel as if everybody hates them. Maybe somebody else said something really nasty to them. But if they don't take that to heart and they brush it off, as some people might say, then in a way that's like deflecting that comment back to you. It doesn't have any effect on them.
Right. So these are like the basis of it, right? So my question is, first off, before we go down this road, is how did you get involved in all this? I mean, what led you to this area of study?
when I went to film school, I was introduced to this guy who did a radio show, and I began to go down to the radio station after we made a documentary. We made a documentary about social engineering. It was just a 10-minute documentary. And the guy that did the radio show at the time, he was very interested in me because I was one of the few people he had ever met who also was interested in those types of subjects. So I started doing radio, and over the years, I have always followed my intuition to information, and I've never thought that I have the truth. A lot of radio shows, radio hosts, television shows, people say, this is where you find the truth. I don't have the truth. And I know that might seem discrediting, but in a world where to be sick is to be healthy and to be healthy is to be sick, to admit and to acknowledge that you don't have the truth, I think is the first step to recognizing that you're on the path to obtaining some form of truth. Because if you think that you have the truth already, then you don't go venture out and search for more information. So over the years, I've sort of been guided by that intuition. And as I've read and I've researched, I've become more interested in topics that perhaps would be perceived as magical. And I recognize that magic and the occult and the secret teachings are not necessarily things that are defined by literalisms, but they're not necessarily metaphors either. There is a middle path, like the middle path of the Buddha or Jesus being crucified between two thieves, the traditional Masonic pillars, that if you stand in the middle as opposed to taking one side or the other, you can find a better or a more reasonable conclusion as opposed to having a bias or some form of subjective faith in something or another, if that makes sense. So basically what you're doing is you're able to find a middle path so that you're not following the faith or the beliefs or the collective or the mindset or the mentality or the group think. You're thinking for yourself. So critical thinking, logical thinking, reasonable thinking. Not that emotion should be entirely removed, but an objective thinking where you don't react with emotion. You react with logic, and then you can apply emotion to that logic. And I think a really good example of that, to sort of answer your question and another question you started the show with, or a comment you had about my show, one of the things that I've been kicked off several networks for is for my coverage of pedophilia, just in general, but child trafficking as well. And a lot of people react very emotionally to that subject. So if I was to talk about it, as I have on many networks, the response is as if I am doing the very thing that I'm talking about. But for me, the emotion doesn't have an immediate effect. To me, objectively looking at people like Jimmy Savile or Jeffrey Epstein, people that are convicted pedophiles, or Jeffrey Epstein is a convicted pedophile. Jimmy Savile was not acknowledged until he had died, and then it came out he was a serial murderer or rapist and so many other things. My emotion comes after the fact, after I've gathered the information, and then my emotion takes effect, and I say, well, there's something here that's very, very dark. I'd like to talk about this because other people would rather ignore it based on that emotion. I, on the other hand, try to discuss those topics just to bring a little bit of light, to light that void, so we all have a better understanding of what's going on as opposed to rejecting it on emotion. I like to accept all information based on that same type of emotion. I call that objectivity. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah, it does. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I've had people tell me, oh, I'm never listening to you again because I had a certain guest on. And I didn't even agree with them. I was just talking to them. Or that I'm talking about a certain subject, so that's what I'm about. And you see, like, these things that you study as far as occult studies, one of the first things they teach you is in there, and it doesn't matter if it's Freemasonry or Hinduism or whatever mystery school behind whatever religion you're studying, the first thing they teach you is to depolarize yourself. What's funny is that we're in a field, Ryan, in radio where it's like the polarization is everything. Sensationalism is everything. People want the information, but not really. Like, they want to be validated, or they don't want to be disagreed with. And they love sensationalism. Like, if we just started talking about UFOs and aliens appearing out of the fifth dimension right now, it'd be all the buzz. But there's a deeper underlying truth that I'm trying to get to behind all of these things, and it becomes difficult sometimes. I'm sure you understand that.
I completely understand that. I unfortunately think that the UFO community, for example, and I believe all of these subjects relate together. On my show, I don't really repeat a lot of things. I do a full 3 hours, and the entire show is basically new content. So it's difficult, I think, to promote a 3-hour show as being a variety of topics as opposed to one theme and then repeating that every hour. That can tend to be confusing in the world of radio as we know it. So when we look at something like the UFO agenda, in line with everything else we've discussed and what we will discuss this evening on the show, the UFO agenda, or maybe not the UFO agenda, but the UFO community has become, and when I say has become, I don't mean this to polarize the UFO community, but has become, like so many others, a cult. They have their cult leader or cult leaders. They have their holy books. And if you ask a critical question about said holy book or holy books, you are condemned and ostracized from that community. Maybe not literally, but in one way or another. They have their leaders. They have their cult leaders who are not to be questioned. I've questioned them, and it's not always a good response. It's an interesting response, but not always a good response. You can get kicked out of places because of that. They have this frenzied attitude. It's like if you watch people, if you've ever been to a church service, a Catholic church service specifically, and you stand and then you sit, and then you stand and then you sit, and then you stand and then you sit. And in any religious service, and you can see this also playing into the political sphere as well, where there's a raising and then a lowering of energy, a raising and a lowering of energy. And there's actually a term for this. It's called intonation, where you rise the energy and then you lower the energy, and then you elevate the energy and lower the energy, and it puts people into a trance-like state. Most of entertainment actually seems to be like this, especially music, and especially music videos, where it's a lot of flashes of light, rising of the energy, lowering of the energy, and it puts people into a trance-like state to make them more open and more compatible with suggestibility, which is, admittedly, there are even patents for this, admittedly, what television is. Television is basically a method by which to put people into a subconscious state so that they can be made easier to influence with various forms of advertisements, et cetera, et cetera. So in the sense of the UFO community, we see that type of thing as well. I mean, all of the different things in the UFO community that otherwise might be seen as separate, if you identify them not as anomalies or coincidences, but as a pattern or part of a pattern, you recognize that the UFO community has unfortunately become victim to the same cult-like type of mentality that is present in most religious practices. And when I say religious practices, I'm saying religious-esque practices. I'm not saying Catholicism, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, religious-esque practices, because I consider atheism a type of religion. Mm. The high priest of atheism is a Richard Dawkins. They have their own holy books. It's a cult-like mentality, and it's religious-esque. Even the definitions, we can't polarize so that we identify them with one specific religion or one specific political view. Like you said, you have to depolarize in order to, well, I would suggest depolarize in order to find that middle ground.
So you seem like a pretty rational guy, and I believe in this. I believe that we need to be skeptical at first and rational about everything. But yet, you know, as you speak about these things, this selfishness, this thing that's above corporations or whatever it is, I don't know if it's an energy. I don't know if it's reptilians. Man, I don't know what it is, but it's definitely using some of these things in these books that we've studied, that you and I have both studied, about symbolism, about the play upon the subconscious mind, about collective consciousness and how to, you know, move mass psychology of people. It's all over the place. I mean, you were talking today earlier about this Hodge character, right? I mean, It's obviously there's an agenda behind this. It's not all as pure as hard as everybody would like to think.
No, you're talking about David Hogg?
Yeah, Hodge or Hogg or whatever his name is. I don't ever pronounce anybody's name right, but yeah, you know who I'm talking about.
Absolutely. I've done a show on this. I called it Obsolete Children, Sorcery, and Serving Man. And I played a little bit on the theme of a couple episodes of The Twilight Zone. And I've started out my radio show recently, and then literally recently I've made statements like this. And then over the past couple of years, I've touched on the subject. I don't address topics as if they are the agenda of some political party. It's very common now to hear uncommon or unpopular beliefs or ideas as being labeled alt-right. And then you have that community that might label another uncommon belief from their perspective as being liberal or even alt-left. I don't think these agendas are liberal. I don't think that they're alt-right. I don't think the organizing of protests are organic. And I think that all of the tactics, or most of the tactics, either themselves or the motivations for such tactics, are very deceptively dark. I think through impressions, someone who is impressionable, impressions are placed upon the impressionable, like those people that are put into a trance through those standing and setting ceremonies in church, or the singing of songs and music videos, the flashes of light, or on TV, puts people into a trance. The impressions, and through those impressions, put people into a magical bind. And logic at that point is subdued by this magical fascination. And so through emotions, and by providing the average person who participates, let's say, in an organized protest, by providing them with a sense of belonging or a sense of purpose, the conscious, or perhaps the subconscious, but the conscious is elevated to a frenzied state of uncontrollable passion. So people respond with yelling and screaming and emotion rather than reason first. And then in the case of a David Hogg and an Emma Gonzalez and the other kids in Parkland, see, I'm not questioning anything necessarily relating to the official story or the alternative narrative. I don't want to classify it with any label. What I'm doing is addressing this as much as possible from an unbiased, unegotistic, as much as possible. We all have a little bit of bias. We all are a little bit egotistic. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of that gray area between black and white magic, if you will. But in addressing this, to me, it looks like these children are being exploited. And those that are killed literally in a shooting like in Parkland, this is a human sacrifice. And even if it's not an intended human sacrifice, the result of such an action is exploited and turned into a human sacrifice. And there's a lot of different ways to perform a sacrifice. There are social sacrifices, just like there are a lot of ways to perform an assassination. President Donald Trump is in the process of being socially assassinated. If not, for a lot of people, he has been socially assassinated. There are a lot of ways to define assassination. There are a lot of ways to define sacrifice. And so those kids that are being used, who are alive, whether or not David Hogg, for example, was at school or at home, like he said in 2 different interviews, and there is no way to take that out of context. That's what he said on CBS. He was at home, then he went back down to the school with a camera to document the event. He got on his bike and rode down real quick. These kids are being used socially, and they are being socially sacrificed. And then through the diversionary methods that are used, especially relating to those children, because you can't criticize them, and you can't question the official narrative because children are supposedly behind pushing this narrative, then the diversionary methods are being used in a manner that makes these children kind of like magical wands. So the waving of a David Hogg, the waving of an Emma Gonzalez diverts people's attention. It makes you look to the left when what's happening that you should be paying attention to is happening on the right side of the stage. And all of those people that are believing that they are going to change the world organically, whether they're the protesters or the kids themselves, they're being used as vehicles of a force that is not being subdued by their actions. It's allowing their actions with temporary support. And I say temporary because although This force needs them now. At some point, they are going to be cast out. And like one of my favorite episodes of The Twilight Zone, they will be made obsolete, just like the people and just like the weapons that they are protesting against, because the state only has need for them. And I don't mean the state necessarily as a political force, but the state as a concept, political or otherwise, only has need for these children until it doesn't have need for them anymore. And at that point, David Hogg will be as obsolete as he mentioned parents. He said it's because of old parents not knowing how to use a democracy. But what he's really saying is you have disgraced the state. You have proven yourself a coward. You have therefore no function. You are obsolete. All of these kids will also at some point be obsolete and nobody will know their names.
Right. And Trippin brings up a point, and we're going to talk about all of the subjects as far as what goes, as far as ufology, conspiracy goes, and, you know, aliens per se. But this is what we're working up to here, I promise you guys. But the thing about it is Trippin is saying, which is going to prove your point, I think, a little more. He says, but does Ryan understand, and he's saying this in the Spreaker chat room, does Ryan understand that that these kids were the ones that created all of these meetings and town halls and stuff? And I think, you know, before you answer that, what I'd like to say is when I was a kid in high school, we did things like that. There's protests all over the place, but what's funny is what the media will focus on. And I think that's your point, right? Because the kids obviously are going to protest. They're hurt. They're scared. There's going to be some people that may not have the same agenda as the hurt and scared children. But it's really about what the media is going to focus on. What's the media showing you every 5 minutes? Or what do you think about that?
Well, first, on your point, that's a huge part of the magical element because it's the attention and it's the focus. And all of those symbolic actions, the protests, the signs, the photographs of children holding up signs, the stories that are told over and over and over about the shooting, let's say, just for the example of Parkland, anytime the media focuses on something or anytime anybody focuses their attention on something, that becomes their new reality, not just scientifically, but perceptually, that becomes the new reality. It's kind of like Bill Hicks said. Bill Hicks watches the news, he said, and he hears about murder and death and stabbings and rape, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he looks out the window and he says, all I hear is crickets. It's nothing. He's like, where are all of these things happening at? But where the attention is focused, that, of course, is where the energy goes. Now, in the case of the comment that you mentioned from the chat room, I don't necessarily believe that the kids are organizing all those events. And let me tell you why. I believe that kids can organize a few events. I believe that kids can organize maybe one town hall, maybe two town halls. I believe that kids might have some money to put together a rally or to make some signs or maybe to make a website. But the amount of money, Joseph, I think it's logical to ask the question, not to criticize, but to ask the question. First of all, if you've been to the March for Our Lives website, they have a section specifically where they've hired a graphic designer to design hundreds and hundreds of signs specifically for March for Our Lives. Now, I don't know how much a graphic designer costs. I've communicated with them before about images and designs for books. And I mean, we're talking hundreds and thousands of dollars just for artwork. Now, let's just say my analysis there is just wrong. But if you start to, instead of looking at these things as anomalies or coincidences, you start to see the pattern, I'd like to know how these kids are able to run an office, how they have staff, how they are able to set up not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a dozen. We're talking dozens of town halls all over the country. Just so happens to be the town hall on Twitter that it's called Town Hall that David Hogg continues to promote. That town hall is literally part of the same company from which receives funding from George Soros, which if you just type in Washington Times, Washington Post, George Soros, you can pull up articles where the man admittedly dumped $30 million alone into some of the Black Lives Matter marches and protests. Again, I'm not concocting a narrative or a story. It's an analysis. If you start putting the pieces together, who is flying tens of thousands of children across the country, or busing tens of thousands of children across the country, or putting them up in hotels? Who is building stages in Washington, D.C. that Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath could play on? Who is building all this? Who is paying for all this? It's not the kids. All right. Now, there are, yes, multi-millionaires that might donate money and celebrities get on board. But no matter how, as far as I'm concerned, and from my research, Joe, no matter how much money you have or how much attention you have, there's something else that's inorganic about this. And when you start looking at it all in a pattern, you look at the money that has to be made for travel, the money that's made for literally having offices, having staff, and not for all of this to develop over years, for this to develop seemingly overnight. I mean, I know people that throw huge street fairs once a year. It takes them 11 months to plan that. I know people that throw huge conferences. It takes them almost an entire year to plan a whole conference. And we're talking about with maybe speakers that aren't even that well known. You're telling me that all of a sudden a couple of kids are able to reorganize the entire political argument in a country and travel all over the country or parts of the country, and they've got the same rhetoric, the same slogans, they've got websites. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. These kids did not come up with that money, at least. And if you start following that, it's not that it's all inorganic. You can organize a few things, but that's really the point. Part of it happens organically, but it's not all organic. And that's the part that really bothers me. I'll give you a really quick example. If you go to the supermarket and you pick up a box of crackers, let's say, and it says Joe's Organic Crackers, USDA certified organic. You think, okay, it's organic. It's probably good for me. But if you go to the USDA's website and you do a little bit of research about what the organic label means, unless it says 100% organic, it's not always organic. In fact, the organic label usually means that the product itself, depending on what kind of organic label, most of the USDA organic labels means that the product itself only needs to be comprised of about 90% organic ingredients. So part of it's organic, but part of it's not organic. And that's how, just like the media focusing attention or us putting our perception on something, if you focus on the small percentage that is organic and use that as a credible element towards the other percentage that's not organic, you can make the entire movement seem organic when only a small little tiny piece of it's organic.
I get that. I totally do. And I believe that what you're talking about, these are fundamentals, and it's hard to get down to fundamentals of psychology, of, I guess you could say, it's almost sorcery, right? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, for example, Ryan, I was watching, I guess I'm hypnotically a rhythm victim to Netflix. I'll admit it, okay? But I was watching Better Call Saul, you know, the thing after Breaking Bad, and this guy was perfect at influencing people to do things, influencing crowds to do things. And you could see how easy it was. He was kind of exploiting that. It doesn't take much to influence a child. It really doesn't. And I'm not saying that they're all influenced. I'm totally sure that after these things happened, that there was fear, that nobody wants this stuff to happen anymore in this country. We just don't. We don't want it to happen anymore. But what I think your point is, and what I want other people to understand, what Ryan's point is when things like this happen, the succubuses come out to play, and they take advantage of these situations in ways that probably most of us are never going to know about.
That's the exploitation. I mean, another thing I thought about was after September 11th, again, I'm not here to argue, debate, prove, or disprove anything, but it's a fact. After 9/11, the Patriot Act was already written and proposed. I mean, this was like tens of thousands of I printed it out one time, tens of thousands of pages. I mean, I printed out a sample of it because it was huge, but tens of thousands of pages. Nobody writes that overnight. It's the same thing with the Parkland shooting. Okay, some of it's organic, but you don't make a website overnight. You don't have signs already prepared basically overnight. You don't have plans for town halls overnight. You don't have all of this set up overnight. And that's how most of the time these situations work. The movements that spawn afterwards, and you see them go from one to another to another. And then the previous movement kind of gets left, like Black Lives Matter. You hardly hear about that anymore, with the exception of a few people who might still try to hold rallies. But then the funding, it seems, went to the women's marches. And then the women's marches sort of died down. And now where did that money go to? It went to March for Our Lives. There is a movement of funds and energy from one movement to the next movement to the next movement. If these things were truly organic and the people that were marching for women's rights, the people that were marching for Black lives, they would continue to do it. And there are some people that do it, but they would continue to do it on the massive scale that they are. At least I would think so, because if I'm a part of something, I am a part of something with my radio show. I don't just take 6 months or a year off, then decide to come back and do it once, then take another year off. It's nonstop.
It don't work.
That to me sounds strange, and it doesn't work that way.
Well, what about the conspiracies, though? At what point does it get ridiculous? I mean, I've heard all kinds of conspiracies about, oh, these were actors and the kids weren't really, I mean, just stuff that would, if I was a parent of one of these children, I would just completely freak out on some of these people. And I'm not saying there's no agenda behind it. Obviously, that I'm not saying that people aren't taking advantage of bad and crazy situations. But at what point does the conspiracy get ridiculous? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, because that ridiculous conspiracy is as ridiculous as the official narrative. You have to de-narratize yourself, if you will, as in the case of depolarizing yourself, and then just ask critical questions. It's not that nobody died. It's not that kids are crisis actors. You see, it's just a play on words. Like, I'll give you an example. I did a show on the 4th of April. And on that show, I talked about, there's actually a couple of articles from Newsweek in particular that talked about Emma Gonzalez. And just listen to the wordplay here, Joe. Newsweek reported that Emma Gonzalez, there's a conspiracy theory about her that's been debunked. And it says the Parkland student did not admit to bullying Nicholas Cruz. Now, that headline is true and false. And that's part of the magic of this. The article actually goes on to explain what the so-called conspiracy theory is, which I don't see it as a conspiracy theory. I see the label conspiracy theory being placed on a factual statement, such as this woman or this child, whoever this girl is, however old she is, did say that we ostracized this kid. She did say that. We ostracized this kid. But they didn't say ostracize, they said bully. So they take something that is somewhat outlandish, something that she did not say, put that into an article, and then associate something she did not say provably with something she did say, which could be misconstrued as bullying. And then they use that headline, which most people just traditionally read the headline, to dispel and to quote-unquote debunk such a conspiracy theory, when to me it's never been a conspiracy theory. It's just, here's what she said, and that's the end of it. That's a statement. So in the article, Joe, they actually say she didn't say it. Then underneath of where they say she didn't say it, they publish her saying it, and then say after they publish she's saying it that she didn't say what they just said that she said, and then before that said that she didn't say, and then in the headline, it's completely different than what they said in the article. It's wordplay. It's I call it word magic. It's the associations with things that aren't there to discredit credible questions that people are asking, whether they're conspiracy theories or the official narrative, which often the official narrative is a conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the whole George Lucas thing, when he was showing people the Jedi mind trick, I believe he was trying to explain a reality to us in his stories in Star Wars, man. You know?
I agree. That's a great example. I agree.
NLP is real. Whether you like it or not, it's real. And I can tell you right now, the ones that I know, you know, and I do this too. I'm human. I become incredibly polar about certain situations. If you ever find me shouting or snapping or getting angry, that means I've taken a side on a subject, right? And I'm polar about it. But what we got to watch out for, I think, is that fundamental thing right there. How they're playing us like that. I mean, I hate to use the Chick-fil-A thing, but you remember when Chick-fil-A had the thing about, you know, they didn't want to serve any homosexuals or whatever. Do you remember that stupid thing?
I remember that, yes.
Stupid. Ridiculous, right? but it was an incredibly polar situation. It was all over the media. It was everywhere. And you know who benefited the most from that? It wasn't the people that were against homosexuality. It wasn't the people that were for it. It was Chick-fil-A. They had record numbers during that time of sales.
Yes.
And that's just it. And they'll take advantage of any situation. That's all I'm saying. You know, other people might say, Ryan, that you're trying to, there's people out there that are, they're trying to stand up and actually help the world, and maybe that you're trying to get them to quit. I don't think that's it at all. I think you're just trying to tell us to be careful about what the narrative is behind what the kids are doing. I believe a lot of these kids are pure at heart. I know they are. They're kids. Come on.
Yeah, and that's the thing that disturbs me, is that the kids are pure at heart. And it doesn't disturb me that they're pure of heart. It disturbs me that they're pure of heart and people are exploiting that purity for their own selfish desires, political or otherwise. What otherwise disturbs me is the fact that I literally actually went, I missed the actual protest, whatever you call it, March for Our Lives. I don't know what they call these things, protests, demonstrations, marches, I'm not sure. But I talked to 3 girls that were standing on the sidewalk as I was walking home a few Saturdays ago. And I'm not going to explain the whole situation, but at the end of it, it deteriorated. I mean, immediately the girl started yelling at me when I disagreed with her and asked her a question because she didn't have anything to support what she had written on her sign. So she literally said, read a book. I said, well, I read a lot of books. And she, well, good for you and your facts. And it's just interesting because when I was walking around here where I live and I was talking to people during the election, there was a group of Hillary, and I don't support Trump, but there was a group of Hillary Clinton supporters. I asked them why they liked Hillary, and that conversation deteriorated within a couple of minutes, and I literally had somebody yell at me, stop harassing us with your facts. Then I looked online after the March for Our Lives in Washington, and there were little girls holding up signs that obviously their parents made for them, and it said, read a book. And there was another one that said, and these were like top Associated Press pictures from the march, like 35 or 40 of the 50 pictures were children holding signs. And I don't mean teenagers, I mean like 7, 8-year-old kids holding signs that they obviously have no clue what's going on unless their parents have taught them what to think at a young age. And it was also about reading books, not bullets. And I'm thinking, but if you actually read a book, you'd have an idea of what you're being used for or what you are a part of. To me, this is not, like I said, a liberal agenda. It's not an alt-right agenda. Those sides exist, but they're fighting amongst themselves, and I don't want any part of that because it's nonsense. But if you were to look at this from a historical perspective, there are a couple of ways to address it, which is why I think history is so important and why these people say read books. What they're really saying is read our books. They don't want you to read every book, because if you read every book, you'd see and you'd get a proper perspective and see what these people are a part of. They want you to read their books, their perspective. They're turning your head towards their information. And I'm not trying to turn anybody's head towards any information. I'm just trying to turn their head away from specific types of information that otherwise have kept them, and I guess all of us, I mean, I'm included in this too, Joe, we're all biased in some way. I'm not saying I'm not biased. What I'm suggesting is if we turn our attention to something specifically, that becomes our reality, as you suggested about the media. So if you were to look historically, and not just in the case of magic, but if you were to look at the United States Constitution, something that a lot of people say, oh, it's outdated. They say the Bill of Rights, it's outdated. But they say the Bill of Rights is outdated in a way where, to me, I'd agree temporarily. I'd say, yes, it is kind of outdated by the standards you're judging it by today. And by the standards by which you judge it today, it's also being judged by a misinterpreted and I believe misidentified part of history. A lot of people think, well, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was written at a time when the world was different. And so since the world was different, we don't need to abide by that anymore. And you know what? Again, temporarily, I can say, I agree with that. That almost makes sense. But then if you would actually look at what the Bill of Rights are, the Bill of Rights aren't a Bill of Rights that tell you from the government's perspective what you can and can't do. It has nothing to do with the government. For them to be government-given rights or government-granted rights, they're not rights that are granted to you in the sense that the government's allowing you to have them. If the government was allowing you to have them and there was some evil conspiracy, the government would just revoke them outright. They're not rights that are granted by government. They're rights that are granted by God, but not an anthropomorphic or religious God. They're rights granted by God, i.e. nature. And the rights that are provided by nature are provided to you not by government, not by God, not by an anthropomorphic God. They're granted to you by birth. And that's why you don't have a right to happiness. You have a right to the pursuit of happiness so that nobody oppresses you in your journey, in your life, in order for you to achieve happiness. Nobody's going to oppress you. That's why you have those rights that are granted to you by your birth. Mm-hmm. It's not that you have a right to own an AR-15. It's not that you have a right to own a gun. That's not what the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, any founding father said. That's not what the Bill of Rights say. It says you have a right to bear arms. So if you define arms, arms are defined as weapons. Yes, weapons are meant to cause harm, but it's not offensive or defensive. They're just weapons. And so if you have a right to bear arms, you don't have a right to guns. You don't have a right to harm people. You have a right to defend yourself. And I think that's what's very, 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 very often missed in the gun argument in particular. It's not about guns. It's not about having or not having guns or banning guns. It's about self-defense. And there's also an amendment, or rather an added, one of the Bill of Rights, number 9, I believe it is, that says that you have the right, or not even the right, I'm trying to think exactly how it's worded. You do not use other rights to eliminate certain rights. So you don't do what David Hogg is doing by citing the Bill of Rights and saying we can't have clear backpacks because that goes against, he said the First Amendment, he's wrong. It goes against the Fourth Amendment if he's mentioning privacy. Using certain amendments like your right to protest. The protesters say, we have a right to be here. You do, but you don't have a right to be there and then take away other people's right to self-defense. That in and of itself would be unconstitutional. Because the whole thing is not about rights that are granted by God or by government. They're rights that are granted by nature. And that's the whole point about magic that I think we were trying to make earlier. The rights that are granted by birth are natural rights. They're common rights. It's natural law. It's common law. And to preserve those rights is a form of white magic, if you will. And to distort and pervert those rights is a form of sorcery and black magic. And that's what people are doing in an attempt to remove people's right to self-defense, and not by doing it in a way where they're forcing people to do it. It looks and feels organic, so people will give up their right to self-defense, give up their right to privacy, and do so because if I don't give up my right to self-defense, more kids are going to die. When they tell you that, more people are going to die if we don't give up guns. That's not a warning. That's a threat, because the people telling you more kids are going to die are in some way, shape, or form responsible for those kids dying, I think. I'm not saying the average person. I'm saying the mindset of give it up or more people are going to die. That's a threat, I think. The right to free speech, as they say. You can't say things if it offends me. That's not what free speech is. To say we have a right to protest. You do, but you don't have a right to protest my right to protest. That's not what the Bill of Rights are. And using those natural rights, forget the Bill of Rights, forget anything to do with things that were written by man per se, just natural law, common sense, objectivity, to prevent people from pursuing happiness, from defending themselves, their family, from speaking freely. All of that is a form of oppression that I would identify with black magic. And I think that the forms of black magic that are being utilized now are just as dark as ever, using kids, using the innocent as shields and wands against criticism and to deflect criticism so that the agenda, which is not liberal, can be advanced forward. And it has nothing, again, to do with politics. I don't think nothing to do with religion. And maybe, like you said, maybe it's a reptilian. Maybe, I don't know what it is. It just feels like a very dark force. Maybe it's some type of parasite that has attached itself to the back of mankind. Maybe it's human nature. I don't know what it is. But nevertheless, the evidence is here. And we're observing something very dark. I just don't know necessarily what it is. I don't know what the truth is in that case. I'm just being totally open to any possibility, and I'm observing things as objectively and unbiasedly as possible.
Yeah, I understand that. The thing that gets me about that, and I'm not shy of getting a little political when it's necessary, But what I would like to stress is that when they made these things, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident is self-evident. Self-evident to me is these are the self-evident things, the basic concepts of what real freedom is. Without these things, you don't have true freedom. But now it's all about specifics and amending the stuff and all of that. And it's just, it's just wordplay and gameplay. And there's definitely an agenda behind it. But again, we're getting to this point because this, I believe, is happening also with this New Age movement.
Very much.
The New Age movement. It's even in the ufology community. And yeah, I'm going to go there. I mean, it's here now. We used to be the community that, everything was open. You could take someone's story and say, wow, I don't have any scientific proof of that, right? But that's an amazing story. Maybe if that did happen, or maybe it didn't. But now this I believe, in my opinion, this selfish thing, this force, whatever it is in our community now. I don't know how long it's been there, but I know it's in here now.
I agree with you. Like I said earlier, I think the UFO community, paranormal community, whatever community you'd like to address, has been infiltrated by that force. And these communities have become a form of cult, as I said, with cult leaders, with specific types of religious texts. Even to the degree for which you have this ascension. It's even turned into a movement, it seems. You have an ascension movement, people thinking that they're going to literally ascend if they follow the likes of certain individuals, if they read their books, etc., etc., and that becomes a form of heaven. And if you don't ascend, you're going to be stuck and suffer on earth. So then you get a heaven and hell out of those communities. So you have a heaven and hell, you have religious texts, you have holy men or holy women that lead the movements. You have people who have died in the past, and perhaps their texts have become religious. They've become like saints. It's very much like a cult, and it has infiltrated all of those communities.
Well, we're going to take our first break of the night, and we're going to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole. We're actually going to get into some occult material, a little bit more specific stuff, and UFOs, ufology, and talk about that a little bit more as well. We'll be right back with Ryan Gable. You guys don't go anywhere.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at UFOseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spaceoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spaceoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over the Spaced Out Radio Night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard. We will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at spacedoutradio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience. Cosmic Passport, heard Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together we own the night.
The opinions expressed by tonight's guest do not represent the opinions or position of Spaced Out Radio, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with SOR Media. Listener discretion is advised. This is Spaced Out Saturdays with host Joe Roop. You can follow Joe on Twitter at Lighting the Void. And if you want to call into tonight's show, dial 501-777-5631. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now, from the deep south of Arkansas, here is Spaced Out Saturday host Joe Roop.
Welcome back to Spaced Out Saturday. Thanks, Bob. I am your host, Joe Roop. We're live on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, the UPR network 107.7 down in New Orleans, on the Fringe FM and on Spreaker. And don't forget, Spaced Out Radio is here for you 7 nights a week. We're here with host of the Secret Teachings radio show, Ryan Gable, and author as well. And Ryan, pretty intense conversation we had the first hour, talking about, polarity, how people get exploited in the media. And now we're going to kind of move into, our world a little bit more. The New Age movement, this woke thing, and the ufology community. These things I believe are being played upon. I'll tell you what I do think, Ryan. The common denominator of all of this, in my opinion, could be money. It could just be greed. I could be wrong.
I'd say greed and money is probably a pretty good assessment. Maybe the tools are perhaps more interesting to address. The tools by which the money is made. That's what interests me. How people are manipulated and deceived. And I think often it's because they're given a sense of purpose that they don't find internally or they don't find elsewhere. And maybe they're tired, like I was. I was very tired even as a young child of hearing people argue over politics or argue over religion, because when I was raised, I was like a conservative, I guess, because everybody else was. And then I had one family member who was a Democrat. So I thought, ooh, let me be a Democrat because that's different. And then I realized that's both of those are really crazy. Let me be a libertarian. And that made a little sense. And I was thinking, you know what? I don't have to define myself as anything. And religiously, it was the same way. I actually remember sitting one day, I was like 17 years old, and I was thinking, okay, I don't want to be a Christian. What do I have to be? Should I convert to Islam? Should I try Judaism? And I just started thinking of all of these religions. And then I realized sort of at the same time, I don't have to be religious either. But I also don't have to be an anarchist. I don't have to be an atheist. I don't have to have a point to defend. It's just an analysis. It's just an observation. It's just being open to things. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's right. I totally agree with that. I believe, UFOs are real. I believe the astral realm is real because I've had experiences with it. I believe in the paranormal because I've had experiences with it. A friend of yours and colleague Mike Vera had an intense paranormal experience at his house, and these things are real. But what I think what we're missing is the path to the truth behind these things, because we're being told so many different things. Hey, reptilians and blue avians and all of that can be real, but I'm telling you guys, and I hope nobody gets mad about this, okay? But this is just my truth, and I'd like to hear you touch on this, Ryan. I have to have more than you just telling me you have an insider to believe this. Either I have to have my own experience or hear it from several people I trust or have some type of evidence. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize for that.
No, it would be like reading a book. If I told you about a really, really good book that I read, and it was about something that you've never necessarily read about before or heard about before, you're not really sure about the information, but I said, no, trust me. I read the book. You have to believe this. Whether or not what I read in the book is true or not, it could be 100% factual. But just because I read it and now I know that story, even if it's true, doesn't mean that just because I tell you it's true that you should believe it. You should probably read the book for yourself. You should have that experience. You should do that research before you just believe it. Again, even if it is true. Even if those blue avians are real, until I have an experience or until I see some evidence, I'm not going to believe something unless I have something to back up what I believe, because that puts you into a very dangerous position. Now you're lending yourself, your energy, your being, your vital essence to somebody else. You're giving part of yourself to somebody else to lead you, and that's very, very dangerous.
Just like in church when they tell you to sit down or stand up, go over here, park right over there, do this. Like, we need to be told what to do and think. That I don't want that in this community. I really don't. And here's another thing too that bothers me is, and I've said this before, and I'll keep driving it till the cows come home. No, you are not a negative person, Ryan, or you listening. You are not a negative person if you have a question or you doubt something. I'm sorry. That does not make you a negative person. That is not negative energy. That is just simply questioning reality, questioning the truth. You can't get to the truth without questions.
Yeah, it would be like if you're listening to the radio show right now and you're listening on the internet and, I don't know, maybe your friend is over and they accidentally unplug the internet and there's just that moment where you unplug it where you can still pick up the internet signal and there's the stream. You hear like 2 or 3 additional seconds, but in those 2 or 3 seconds, your friend says, hey, the internet's going to go out. Oh, don't be negative. You're not be negative. You're just stating a fact. The internet's about to go out. If someone's breaking into your house and your friend says, hey, I think someone just broke in the basement window, and you say, don't be negative. Leave me alone. I'm playing video games. That's not negative. Okay, to announce a fact, to announce something that's happening, to caution your roommate somebody just broke in, it's just a fact. It's negative to reject information, I think. It's negative to reject what somebody else is, in some cases, able to demonstrate to you beyond any doubt. It's not negative to ask questions. It's very negative to suppress people who are asking questions, to oppress that group who maybe they are true skeptics rather. It's interesting how that word has been really tampered with, like a skeptic now, especially science. Mainstream science loves that. We're real skeptics. Mainstream science, most of those people are not real skeptics. And see, then again, you have to be careful when you say science, because it's not science. There are scientists. There are scientists with personal bias. There are scientists with special interests. There are scientists who are just ignorant. There are scientists who are really brilliant but still ignorant. There is an entire classification that you could go through for every type of scientist. It's not science. Just every level, it seems, Joe, you have to really redefine and reshape, or rather put back into its proper context with how it should have been originally, but it's been taken out of context in order to get a better understanding. So to be a true skeptic is to just say, I have no point to defend. I just have a question. I'm skeptical of what you're saying because I don't have any proof. Even if what you're saying is true, I need proof. That's what it means to be a skeptic. Not, well, either believe me, or if you don't believe me, you're a negative person and you're just skeptical. Well, yeah, they are skeptical if you don't believe somebody because they've never provided you any proof or evidence of something. My point is just no matter what it is, whether it's skepticism, it's, again, say science. A lot of people say science, scientists or science. They suppress the truth and free energy. Well, it's not science. Science didn't do anything. Science is an intangible element. It's a field of study. And it's not just dealing with chemicals or nature per se. Science is observation and accumulation of data. What we're doing right now is a form of science. That's why they call them the occult sciences. They weren't just dealing with alchemy, transmutation, like literal dealing of chemicals and metals and things like that. It was a science. It was observation, study, putting things into practice to determine outcomes. That's what science is. And it's the same thing with politics. It's the same thing with media. It just seems like everything has been taken out of context. And then when you put it back into context, people tell you're taking it out of context. No, it was already out of context. We're putting things back into context, if that makes sense. Just all of these words and definitions have been redefined and altered. It's kind of like 1984. In 1984, the dictionary got smaller, but nowadays our dictionary is literally getting larger. But the words that are being added have no meaning, and the words that had meaning that were in the dictionary are being reduced of their meaning. And if you're intelligent or you just ask questions, what you said, if some people say, hey, I have a question, you're not negative. It's not necessarily positive, but it's more positive, I would say, than negative to ask a question or to ask many questions, as many questions as you can possibly think of. That's a good thing, I think. And to ask those questions and to be intelligent or to be knowledgeable, to read a book is seen as some type of disease or illness nowadays. But to be ignorant and to communicate in animal noises, as some people tend to do, I mean, literally and figuratively, that seems to be the height of praise in our society. And that just seems very wrong to me.
Yeah. Well, there is some sensationalism to this at all, but I've always dreamed, and I'm just going to be real specific here. I've always dreamed about being able to go to contact in the desert, because it was the biggest thing, man. Like in this field, the conference in the UFO community, all the greatest speakers there. You know, I've always wanted to go there. Well, not to mention I love the desert too. Are you going to Contact in the Desert?
I am going this year again. Yes.
And what I'm finding is some people that were involved with this are just leaving because I mean, I'll just say it, because there's people there that they feel are misleading the public. And whether they're right or wrong, I got to respect that in a way. But at the same time, you got other people like Robert Schoch's going there. Other people are going that I know are very credible. So at what point how can we disassociate ourselves with what we feel is not true or what's wrong with the community, but still be involved? It seems like such a trap sometimes.
I agree with you. I don't really have an answer. I can tell you the way that I think in many different formats is that if you participate, and I'm going to this, but I'm not going because I support the big name speakers. Last year, Jim Mars didn't go. He was a friend of mine, but he went the year before, and I went. I talked with Jim Mars, and I spent some time with Jim and some other people, like you said, Robert Schoch. I've never actually met him, but there were some other speakers there and I know some of them personally, and they're great. They're great. They're honest people, for as far as I can tell. Some of them I've hung out at other events or I've stayed with them before, but they don't necessarily associate themselves with the other names. And so I don't know, the way that I think about it is that the people that are going to come into these communities, let's say for the first time, whether they watched Ancient Aliens or they're just interested in something different than the standard status quo, I don't necessarily think that this is an egotistic thing to say, and perhaps it's egotistic to say it's not egotistic. I don't know. I think from my experience in doing this so long, because I've done this for almost 10 years, and I've been pretty much everywhere in this field, and I've experienced a lot of things firsthand, and I have all types of documentation to back up anything that I claim regarding this subject. I feel like it's kind of our responsibility for new people coming into this field that they don't immediately get sucked in by the people that we know. And I know two of them 100%, maybe 99%. I don't know if anything could be 100%, but 99% for sure. They are con artists. They are very, very deceptive people, and they are manipulative, and they are greedy, and are concerned with nothing except personal gain and personal profit. As far as I'm concerned, they are black magicians, and they are sorcerers and casting a magical spell over the people that follow them. Now, that doesn't mean it's my responsibility or your responsibility or anybody else's to take people that are coming into that field and say, okay, no, don't listen to them, listen to me. That's not what I mean. I mean, people should be informed. You can believe whatever you want. And I've done several shows on this where I'm not telling people to believe me. I'm saying, look, here's my personal experience with these individuals. From what I've experienced, they are deceptive. Some things they say are accurate. Perhaps that is a manipulative tactic. But I do not trust these people, and here are the reasons why. Again, these are personal experiences. In some cases, I have physical documentation to prove what I'm saying. I'm not saying to believe me and not believe them. I'm saying listen to what they say. Hell, buy one of their books. Read what they say, but put it in proper context. And if you do, and you do see what I say, then you'll know it to be true. And if you don't, then it's not that I'm wrong and you're right, or that I'm right and you're wrong. You just think that what they're promoting is factual. So go ahead and follow them. I'm just trying to provide people information from my personal experience that would maybe help prevent some people from falling into a trap that I myself could very well have fallen into, where I would have compromised myself in order to make money. In one case, I had the opportunity, or compromised myself to become more famous than I am now, which in the same case, I had the opportunity to do so. But I said no, because if I have to censor what I'm doing, I mean, literally, if I have to censor what I'm doing, then what's the point in even doing it? I'm not doing it to make money. I'm not doing it to become famous. I'm not doing it for groupies at a conference. I'm doing it because it's important. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, then that's what I mentioned at the beginning of the show. There's, and you know, I'm conflicted about this as well, and I don't even know if it's smart to be this honest on this radio show about this stuff, but I feel like I have to be. I mean, I'm conflicted about these things as well. I hate dumping money into a network, the Fringe FM, every single month and struggling to get a return, but at the same time, I feel like the message has to get out too. You know, that's important to me. I love story time. I love listening to people's stories, their paranormal stories, their theories, the intergalactic federations of whatever. But again, at the same time, I feel like it's better to get real answers. And if I become of the mindset that there's no way we're going to get real answers, then why are we doing this to begin with? I think that journey to get real answers is more important to me than just story time. You know,
those real answers are definitive, or are they fluid in nature?
Some of them are definitive. I mean, but most of them are kind of fluid. For example, the shadow beings I've seen in the astral realm. I never believed in those things, Ryan. Never in a million years would I ever believe in anything like that, even though I had those experiences as a child. But experiencing them as an adult, picking up books by other people, when I see the parallels of everyone's stories, right, about the astral realm, people that don't even know each other, and they're talking about the same things, they've never read each other's books, then I feel like, hey, we're getting somewhere. And then we go back to story time, and it's, to me, it's like one step forward and 3 steps back, and that's how I feel about it. You know, last week I talked to Lynn Caston about reptilians, and I know you've talked to David Icke on your show a couple times, right? Have you had him on a couple times?
I've had David Icke on one time.
One time?
Yes.
And, you know, they're both of them, they're incredibly persistent about this message and about these things. David Icke more so because he talks about a lot of the fundamentals that you do as far as black magic and sorcery and the occult and how everybody's being manipulated. But when it comes to the alien races, all we have are people's, you know, stories. The Greys and stuff, I mean, I know there's an alien race. I believe there is, but millions of them. Some of them look like blue chickens. Some of them are reptilians. Some of them are this or that. I promise you guys, I'm digging into this deeper than I ever have before, and I do want answers. Shapeshifters, things like that, you know. And I get laughed at. They're like, wait a minute, you believe in magic and these things and that thing, but you don't believe in aliens. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want answers. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm in front of this microphone. I would have never gotten to talk to you if I never would have done this. We never would have met. I never would have got to talk to people like Whitley Strieber, John Anthony West, or whoever. That's why I'm here. But I don't know how we're going to do this thing, Ryan, without making money. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. Well, not just necessarily doing it, and maybe you're implying this as well, but just keeping yourself alive, keeping a network on air. It's not necessarily a cheap thing to do. It's not about making a lot of money to become rich. It's about doing what you can with the resources that you have. I mean, if it wasn't for networks like the Fringe FM or, in my case, that saved me from having to go off radio for a while, the L&M radio network initially, after I got removed from dark matter, you know, these are not networks that are bringing in $100 million a year, and people are living a fancy lifestyle, as I've witnessed. You're doing what you can with the resources you have, and there's an interesting. I'm sure you know this. It's like an interesting and gray area between making money and doing what you're doing because you love it, and that being the form of your wealth and success. It's just like it's a very blurry line sometimes. You want to make money, but you also want to be successful, but you also want to help other people. And if your ultimate goal is to help other people or just inform, or maybe it is just to entertain with a little bit of information, it's not always, in fact, it's rarely, if ever, in my experience, in terms of knowing people, profitable in any way, unless you literally sell. When I say sell your soul to the devil, I'm saying that metaphorically, the devil in this case is a concept. You're selling yourself out. You are doing things to benefit self to the detriment, I believe, strongly, to the detriment of other people, especially if you know better. If you know things that you refuse to talk about, not because, well, there's a gray area there. Some people say, well, there's a gray area there. Maybe you should just censor what you say so you can make money, so you can get onto another network. But if I do that, then what's the point in even doing a show? Yeah, you might reach other people, but as far as I'm concerned, at that point, I'd be compromised. I feel like you would be compromised. Anybody would be compromised just selling out a little bit. And I believe that because if you sell out a little bit, you set a very dangerous precedent. And if you sell out a little bit more, you set an even more dangerous precedent. And eventually, before you know it, you're successful by material terms, but you've also, in that case, sold your soul entirely, because every time you sell out a little bit, you set that precedent, and then you set another precedent, and you set another precedent. A little bit of your soul is set alongside with that precedent. And I think that that's very, very dangerous. It doesn't mean that there isn't healthy compromise, but there's a difference between compromise and outright censorship. Even if compromise, unfortunately, in some cases turns into censorship, as in don't talk about this subject tonight because we should focus on X, Y, Z, and then you agree to that, and then eventually, and I know some radio hosts who have done this, and then eventually compromise turns into, all right, you can't talk about that subject at all anymore. Just period. Don't ever mention it again or you're off the air. That's not real to me. I mean, personally, I have enough conviction where I just say no. I am a no compromise person in that sense. I don't want anything to do with somebody who's going to tell me don't say that. Not because I have something to prove, but because I am not going to compromise myself in any way where I set that precedent that can set even a dangerous subconscious time bomb. So the next time it happens, then I think, well, you know what? I'll compromise a little bit more. And you just keep taking a step back. And I don't mean this in radio. I'm not talking about me. I'm just speaking in generalities. I think for anybody in their life, if you keep taking steps back, eventually you're backed into a corner. And the person that keeps nudging you backwards, they have all the power. There has to be a point where you say, no, this is what's going to happen. And I think we all have a lot more power than we believe that we have. And I don't mean that in some self-help way. I mean that to internalize that concept, we all have a lot more power than we think we have.
Have you yourself, have you seen UFOs? Have you had paranormal experiences yourself? I think I've asked you this before, and if I have, I'm sorry, but I don't remember the answer.
No, I don't think you asked me that before. I usually don't talk much about my personal experiences. But I had an experience when I was a kid, but I never called it an experience. I just remember seeing certain things when I was a kid, especially when I was a lot younger. And even as I got older, there were things that sort of changed. So I've had things that scientifically or medically, I guess, would be described as sleep paralysis, but they weren't necessarily sleep paralysis because I experienced sleep paralysis later in life, and that was real sleep paralysis. And the other experiences I had were not the same. They were very, very different, where I could feel 4 distinct energies, if you will, in the room with me, and I could look around, but I could not move my body. I didn't feel anything negative or anything positive. It was very neutral on one occasion. It happened 2 other times. The third time it happened, it was very dark, and I could feel something, not literally, but it felt like something was crushing my body, and I was actually able to throw myself physically up at that point and turn the light on. So I've had experiences like that. I've seen unidentified flying objects, and I'd say like 9 out of 10 times I see one, it turns out to be a commercial jet. They're not necessarily alien spacecrafts. I have seen weird things that I can't identify. Again, that doesn't mean that it's an alien spacecraft. It doesn't mean that it's a commercial airliner, whatever the case is. I'd say the most strange experience I had in relation to what you said about then reading other books on the subject and finding other people who have seen the same thing. I saw kind of like a silhouette of a character, somebody in a black suit, but they were all blacked out, like just a face that was completely blacked out. They had no defining features, and they had a black hat on. And I just, as a kid, I had seen that quite a few times, and I was told it's my imagination. And then when I got older, I had interviewed Nick Redfern a few years ago, like 4 years ago, and he gave me his book, actually, At Contact in the Desert, and about the Men in Black. And so I read that, and I read for the first time a story about the Hat Man, and the description that somebody gave about the Hat Man was word for word, if I would have been able to at the time, probably how I would have explained my experience. So otherwise, I would probably never have talked about that experience as a kid, not really considering it an experience per se. But then I read a story of someone else who has, quote unquote, experienced it, and then that experience becomes an experience, and it becomes a lot more real. I don't just take every time I hear a floorboard creak and think that that's an experience. And likewise, I don't ignore all of those experiences. I just, again, with the middle ground, I like to take as much information as I can and then address things as they come about through research.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I know to be real, that I'm not afraid to say is real, is these beings, or whatever they are, in between this world of sleep and awake. Can I define it? No. Some people call it the astral realm, the out-of-body experience. When
like shadows or phantoms?
Yeah, and I've seen them myself, blacker than black. You know, I talked about this the other night. Yeah, I've seen them myself, and blacker than black beings, and there's something to it. And when I read occult text, it doesn't matter who it's from. It doesn't matter if it's from Manly P. Hall or Blavatsky or even Crowley or some of the older Rosicrucians. In these texts, this realm is mentioned. You know, this astral realm, the realms between sleep and awake, the golden dawn, you know, the sun and the moon, all the symbols for these two different realms. And all of this stuff is real. But what I'm afraid of is the closer we get to the truth, the more distractions that are going to happen. And it makes me angry. And I think, as you listening too, I would like to think that you would be angry too if we are actually close to the truth about aliens, what exists, orbs, crop circles, whatever you want to call it, that's moving in between these realms, and we're getting closer to the truth. But meanwhile, the masses are getting distracted by some Star Trek story, you know. And I don't know if these stories are real. I know who you're referring to. I got to tell you, I'm looking into it myself. It just feels, I'll tell you, in my gut, like a distraction. That's what it feels like to me. I could be wrong, though. Probably am wrong.
In a lot of those books that you read, and I'm sure some of the listeners read as well, whether you're reading Hall, and I never got it as much from Hall, but if you read Levi, for example, Eliphas Levi, or now I'm reading The Magus by Francis Barrett, I'm almost finished with that. Those books in particular, they explain in very logical and, for the most part, relatively so, easy to understand terms a lot of the things that we today in certain communities are obsessed with in regards to shadow people or conjuring spirits or the dream state or whatever you might have, the paranormal, as we might call it. And from my personal experience, I don't know what you think from reading those types of books, Joseph, but it seems like they had it figured out a long time ago. And the distraction is on other types of subjects that are similar, but they themselves, as a distraction, are like magic wands. Again, they're diverting people's attention away from information that's already been divulged. To me, it seems like the concepts of strange forms of paranormal activity, telekinesis, telepathy, in any of the books that I've read, it seems like they've been very thoroughly explained, even in somewhat scientific terms. And, I mean, for example, I saw a story just recently. Some scientists were able to teleport little particles of light, I guess, photons. They were able to literally teleport photons over so many hundreds of feet.
Right.
Well, information is light. So if you transfer information in light, and someone can access that light through that transformation, then you could literally read somebody's mind. I mean, that's just scientifically speaking. I mean, the idea of believing something until it manifests, like a thought form, like a tulpa. If you take a placebo, a sugar pill, and you believe that you're getting better, it's because of your will and intent to get better that you get better. That's a scientifically proven fact. And will and intent are two of the most important elements in conducting magical ceremonies to have definitive and appropriate and desired effect. That's a scientific fact, but it's also a scientific fact of occultism. I think it's one and the same. The problem is not only deception or diversion or greed. It's also that there's a lot of misunderstanding because the fields that should be one have been separated into these specialities, and then those polarized specialities argue and fight over what the truth is when they all have a little piece of it, I think.
Right. It's all there. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that the subconscious is the answer to a lot of these questions. And when I say that, I'm not talking about from a scientific, psychological point of view. I don't think we study it enough. I don't think we study, like you talk about on several occasions, about how corporate logos affect us, how colors affect us, how smells affect us, why we dream certain things. You know, if you were to, I don't know, try to become a magician, the first thing they would tell you is to get a journal and write down everything you dream about and the planetary alignments and stuff. And you think it's all just a bunch of crazy stuff until you start learning about cause and effect. So again, what I'm saying is I see the effect of telling a story that's absolutely fabulous, right? Like, I would love to believe there's an interstellar galactic federation of light that's been, you know, protecting the planet and all this stuff. And then they have all these different names and they look like all the different characters on Star Trek. But when I look up at the stars and when I look at everything I've seen, it's just like Bill Hicks says, I see crickets.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel most of the time about those things.
And it gets to where I'm just trying to stress that we will always have story time here. We will always have people that come and share their experiences here, because I think that's important too. But I think it's also important that we as a community, whether you're all about paranormal, you're all about ufology, whatever your subject is, or if you're just all of it, that we really try to find the answers instead of giving in to the high of the sensationalism. Like going from conference to conference and buying as much stuff. There's a high to all this stuff, you know, but that is a distraction in itself too. Just think about it. Look, if there is some galactic federation, wouldn't it be nice not to prove it to the world, but to prove it to yourself? Don't take somebody's word for it or someone else's story. If you can prove it to yourself, come talk to me about it and tell me how you did it. But I think that's more important than just following a crowd. You know what I mean?
I agree with you. Absolutely. Internalization, introspection, much more important than externalizing and looking for answers somewhere else. Isn't that seems to be the pattern? Again, it's not an anomaly. It's not a coincidence. It's a pattern where you look to an institution such as, let's say, a church, for some type of external and vicarious atonement. Even for aliens, most people look to NASA. They look to certain specialized individuals who supposedly are in contact with those aliens for aliens. They look externally for medical information. Not that that's a bad thing. Not that it's a bad thing to look externally at all, but it's a bad thing I think, to look externally for everything. And instead, we should be focused internally on searching for those things, be it God, be it aliens, or be it what you know to be true about health. I don't think we should be looking externally for everything, just a few things. We should be looking internally for most things. And the few things we don't have internally, per se, we can find those externally, but only then to internalize those externals.
I think the era of journalism and radio needs to come back. I don't know if you remember Larry King. You know, Larry King, he took the middle of the road, right? But he would hit people with the hardest questions that he could, right? You know, he would always touch the border. Hit them with the hard questions, but don't be disrespectful. Man, he was the best at that, I thought, when he did that, his older show back in the day. And Art Bell was, too, when he started. Of course, you know, you got booted off that network, so you see what happened there. And I think that might be one of the reasons why he left, too, because, look, I hate saying this, guys. I really do. But it's up to us to change this. It's up to me. It's up to Ryan. It's up to Dave Scott, because this field is definitely tainted. It is, this whole radio thing. And I believe a lot of people there's great investigators, but there's also, there's people that are not that great, you know. And I want to talk to them all, but I just don't know if I'll get to the answers in this lifetime, but I'm going to try. Damn it, I'm going to try.
I'm trying to. You know, a lot of things are just, I think misunderstood or misinterpreted or taken out of context. Like, for example, the subject of reptilians. I'm not saying that reptilians don't exist or that they do exist, but what I'm suggesting is that perhaps part of that is a metaphor. Now, if you were to look at the human body or human nature, we have animal bodies, we have mineral bodies, we have vegetable bodies, and that is actually explained in the classic story of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by the theosophist Frank Baum, where the animal, mineral, and vegetable bodies are explained as the lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow. And then more scientifically speaking, or in terms of anatomy, they would be described as the primate, mammalian, and reptilian complexes of the brain. So to say that we are controlled by reptilians is a literalism. We are controlled by reptilians, but the reptilian that I'm saying we're controlled by is one of an internal, yet external in the terms of the body, nature. You're controlled by the reptilian complex. And perhaps part of that argument of reptilians control the world, well, in a sense they do, because the reptilian complex is territorial, it's aggressive, it's very biased, it's ritualistic. And those are all the elements by which most politicians and even corporations, most world leaders rule by those types of complexes. So it's metaphoric, it's literal, but it's maybe also just a symbol. It's also perhaps a little bit real. It's not, like you said earlier, you have to depolarize yourself. It's not so polar where you believe in aliens or you don't believe in aliens. That's not how it works. So you believe in UFOs or you don't believe in UFOs. It's like that's not how it works. I mean, you can make it work that way, but if you make it work that way, you're missing the point. You're not really doing any research or doing yourself or anybody else any favor. You're just biasly examining something and trying to find evidence to support what you believe based on a prior conclusion without looking at the evidence that might alter that conclusion that was held previously. Just another really quick example on this subject. If you're not thinking about aliens, think about ascension. That's a big and pretty popular subject now. A lot of people, I don't know. I see people that are saying they're ascension coaches now. I don't know how you can be an ascension coach, but nevertheless, if you are to read about old initiation ceremonies in Greece or in Egypt of the mystery schools, typically in the highest degree of initiation, and we can use the Great Pyramid of Giza as an example, probably one of the most common known bridal chambers that there is, and the bridal chamber referencing the sacred alchemical marriage between the bride, which in the case of Egypt would be Isis, and her long-lost husband, lover, prince and king Osiris, which we are all representative of, and there's an agricultural analogy there as well. But if you take the initiate enters through the eastern side of that temple, and the eastern side of that temple is the setting sun, it is the evening star, it is the land of shadow, and you enter from the darkness, you enter into the structure, into the temple, in the case of Egypt, into the pyramid. You go through a series of hardships, symbolic hardships, which represent the hardships of life. You enter into the main king's chamber with the sarcophagi, obviously not a burial chamber. I think we know that at this point. You lie down in the sarcophagi, In the case of Egypt and in the case of Greece and in some other places around the world, South America in particular, they had certain hallucinogenic drugs that were mixed. In Egypt, it was the blue water lily. In Sumeria, the woman that oversaw it was called the Hierodol, which was later translated into harlot, which means whore, because the original word was mistranslated. So the most sacred and holiest position in Sumeria and Babylon was translated into the whore, which is why we have the whore of Babylon, known as the Scarlet Woman. And the Scarlet Woman was called the Scarlet Woman because these priestesses that oversaw that final stage of initiation wore red robes. And those red robes were called, after the Sumerian word for truth, ritu, from where we get the word ritual. So when they're placed into the sarcophagi, they're there for 3 days. They're in a trance-like, death-like state. They're supposed to commune, literally, from what I understand, from anything that I've read, literally go into an altered state, kind of like a dream state, communicate with spirits, like a spirit journey, and then you come back to the body after 3 days, and you are pulled out of the tomb by the grip of the lion, the hand of the lion, the lion's paw, out of the tomb to the words, "Come forth." And you see that in the Bible, Lazarus, come forth. So you're pulled out of the tomb, and then you exit the temple on the morning of the the fourth day. You spend 3 days in there, the fourth day or the end of the third day, but you exit the temple right at the time of the rising sun and the morning star, and you are considered at that point reborn. You are born again as a born-again Christian. You have become a son of God, or a son of the gods, a son of God. And as a son of God, you are born as a star. And the reason that the word ascension, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this small rant here, has been misidentified and misrepresented and misdefined is the fact that to ascend was to be understood as the process by which a human being would go from being a son of woman to a son of man through initiation, to a son of the gods, to, in the final initiation, the son of God. You would be a son of God. Jesus was a son of God, and you would be reborn, born again, resurrected, and you would be moved on to the land of the living, which were all of the other initiates who practiced and preserved the secret teachings. So at that point, you have ascended. And in Egypt, the Giza Plateau, especially the Pyramid of Giza, which is Isa or Isa, which is Isis, and also the the Japanese shrine of Amaterasu, the sun goddess who was in the cave for 3 days, was dead and then resurrected and brought sun and light and warmth back to the world. That is actually known, the Pyramid of Giza, the main pyramid, is known as the place of ascension, because it was the ultimate bridal chamber by which initiates underwent initiation. So in that case of initiation, it's not a literal ascension, it's a metaphoric ascension. And it is a metaphor and a symbol, and even in the sense it's an allegory, because it's a story that conceals a deeper meaning about the soul's descent into matter. There are so many elements to this. It's not about a physical ascension. It's not about necessarily a physical reptilian. There are a lot of metaphors and symbolic ways that this can be explained and understood. And I don't necessarily think that that's always a bad thing. I think sometimes it's a good thing because it prevents this type of knowledge from being perverted. Although in some cases it's already perverted. I don't know. My opinion is sometimes it's a good thing, perhaps, that these things are misunderstood. I don't know. What do you think? Is it always a good thing, or is it always a bad thing?
Well, I think it's a good thing, and I'll tell you why. Because the whole pearls before swine thing, as understood by few, is made many people angry, and that is the whole concept of the polarization thing, and it's all about perception. You know, if you believe something with your whole heart because you've been raised this way for 30 years or whatever it is, and I tell you a truth that could actually be a truth, it's a lie to you and your world, so therefore I'm a liar. So why even bring it up? You know? So they leave the symbols and stuff, so the actual seekers, the people that understand that they don't know everything and they want to find the truth, keep seeking, and they'll start seeing through all this stuff. And that's what occultism is all about, in my opinion. But I think that's why it was designed that way. It's not because people aren't worthy of the truth, or they aren't worthy to know the secrets or whatever. I always thought it was because, if they're going to believe something, if they're content with their beliefs, then why mess up that for them? Why even mess that world up for them? Let them be. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think some of that knowledge is very, very powerful. And if you use it for the wrong reasons, it can destroy yourself, which is, I believe, is part of I think it was the story. Yeah, it was the story of Samson, where he pushes the two pillars apart in the Bible, and pushing the two pillars apart more as a Masonic analogy. The pushing apart of the two pillars destroys the temple, yourself being the temple, and by pushing apart the pillars of reason and justice or strength and beauty, however you define them, there are quite a few ways. By pushing apart those pillars that hold up the temple collapses, and in that temple is buried reason. And reason is the true essence of God. So by aligning yourself in a central point as opposed to pushing apart those two pillars like Samson, I think that was the meaning and the intention behind those types of symbols, whether it's the High Priestess Tarot card, where the High Priestess sits between the two pillars, or it's even, I know a lot of people get very, very scared when they see Baphomet, but Baphomet is not an evil character. And in regards to what you just said, Baphomet is probably one of the best examples of that, where it's not meant to be a symbol that promotes all of the occult teachings directly. It preserves them in a way where the person that doesn't understand them will be prevented from accessing them, because those things are very dangerous to the uninitiated. To the person who understands it, it's very easy to break down what Baphomet is. Baphomet is not the devil. Baphomet is not Satan. And the proof of that comes within, at least I believe this, if you look at the tarot deck and you see El Diable or the Devil tarot card, there are a lot of differences between those two characters. El Diable, the devil, has the torch holding to the ground. In Baphomet, the torch is between the two pillars, meaning truth, light, life. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light, or the life rather, but also the light of the world. Is crucified between two thieves. You have the flaming torch between the two horns. Baphomet's horns are pointing upward. The devil's horns are pointing downward. The symbolism of that of that particular image of Baphomet compared to the devil, if you look close enough, you see that they're nothing alike. And the pentagram on Baphomet, which is pointing upward, you look at the same pentagram on the devil, it's pointing down. Baphomet is androgynous. It's a combination of male and female, passive and active, fire and water, etc., black and white. The devil is a symbolism of the infernal world, where the human beings are detached from one another. They are set into the male and the female, which are chained to the black cube, by which is the cube of Saturn, the square of the material world, for which Satan, or Saturn, like Ptah in Egypt, is the creator. So there's a lot of differences between those two things. And if you look at Baphomet, the proof in what you just said, Joseph, is in Baphomet, because so many people look at that and they're terrified. But Baphomet is not an evil character. Baphomet is, for lack of a better word, a very positive symbol. But it's used as like a scarecrow to prevent people from accessing things, I think, that otherwise would be very, very dangerous to themselves if they access them without the proper understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, and I saw a picture the other day of a satanic church that had Baphomet on there, and that's where everything goes wrong. Like, they're not, that church, that guy that, I'm sure you guys have seen it somewhere in South America, that guy is using that symbol and doesn't even understand it himself. But therefore, because he's using that symbol means that everybody that's associated with it, talks about it, has it, understands it, they're all Satanists and Luciferians, because that guy in that church who's claims himself as a Satanist is putting it up on, is idolizing it.
Right, and then the associations that otherwise wouldn't be there.
And this is the nature of the whole thing. And this is the truth behind the truth that's behind the truth that I'm trying to get to, whether it's the occult, whether it's aliens, ufology, the paranormal, the 410 world. I know there's some truth there, and I know it's time to get to it. And I think it's time for, I know you guys heard Dave Scott and Chase Kletsky having it out the other night, and they're friends, but they had it out. I really think it's time for real journalism to take over. People had faith in guys like Larry King and Art Bell back when he started. They had faith that they were going to get to the answers and find the truth. I don't think you're going to find out the truth doing suicide missions. You got to be a little bit tactical about it, but I think it's time for a new generation to take over, especially on alternative radio. We need to start using these tools to our advantage.
I agree with you, Joseph.
I don't want to get too dim. I know that a lot of this sounds negative, but there is some, it does kind of feel a little dark and a little negative, but at the end of the day, I think it's necessary because I don't necessarily believe that everyone's truths aren't going to be validated. Even Crowley talked about gray aliens and stuff at the end there. What bothers me about this and what I'd like to talk to you about in the next segment, if you're willing to stay with me, that'd be great, because I really don't have anything planned for the next segment. But if you're willing to stay with me, I'd like to talk about that, about how a lot of these worlds collide, and maybe just get your opinion on that.
That's fine. I'll stay with you for the whole hour.
That's great. I really appreciate that. Guys, we're going to take our last break of the show. We're here with Ryan Gable from The Secret Teachings. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
It's Cosmic Sundays with me, Elizabeth Anglin, in Cosmic Passport. Let me take you down a 3-hour spiritual journey where we will get into everything from ET contact to Psychic Sundays. It's a journey of listening and learning together with some of the best professionals in their fields. You can tune in to Cosmic Passport at spacedoutradio.com every Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The opinions expressed by tonight's guest do not represent the opinions or position of Spaced Out Radio, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with SOR Media. Listener discretion is advised. Want more information about our programming? Check out spacedoutradio.com. You can follow our host, Joe Rube, on Twitter at Lighting the Void. Call in to tonight's show at 501-777-5631. Now, entering the radio ring from Arkansas, Spaced Out Saturday host, Joe Roop.
Welcome back to Spaced Out Saturday. I'm your host, Joe Roop. Don't forget, after the show live, if you want to stick around for some more live radio, S4 will be on tonight, and you can listen to that on Spreaker or on the Fringe FM or at Spaced Out Radio. The call-in number, if you want to call in, is 501-777-5631. And we are here in the final hour with Ryan Gable. Ryan, thanks for sticking it out with us in the third hour, man. I really appreciate it.
You got it, buddy. I love to be here. I love these conversations. I'd be laying in bed thinking about it if I wasn't on air.
Right, me too. It's all I think about, actually. So the things that I wanted to talk about now was putting it all together. When it comes to the occult, the paranormal, and ufology, I have some concerns, and I have some things that I worry about, and some cool things that have been validated for me. When someone like, I'll bring him up again because I hate to throw names around a lot, but, when someone like Robert Schoch talks about Atlantis and finally brings it up, that to me is somebody who would never talk about that, who is now discussing those things. That to me validates. That means, okay, we're really starting to find some answers about this stuff now. We're really digging down and getting there. But then I read something like Crowley, where he invoked this being, Iwas, whatever you want to call it, and they're talking about this new era where everybody's just going to do whatever they want, and it's really a new age type thing. And then you got this being that he drew that looked like an alien, and the alien tells him and says, back then they called us angels, but in the future they're going to call us something different. It makes me think, when we get down to the bottom of these things that I call cosmic and natural truths that are being taught in all these mystery schools, and I've asked this to Jordan Maxwell, and I kind of got an answer like, hey, you need to find this out for yourself. Are these teachings a good thing, or are they just another road to something more sinister? Sometimes I wonder.
They can be, I guess, a road to something more sinister, but I think they're also just a tool. I think you said the word tool before we went to break, and I think that, like most things, the secret teachings, if you will, are just a tool. Just like a hammer is a tool, but you can also use a hammer as a weapon. You can use it offensively, or you can use it defensively. Maybe the secret teachings would be best defined as a preservation of the understanding of the laws of nature. And then you could define those laws as the laws of God, and obeying those laws would be obeying God. Disobeying those laws, subjecting those laws to the will of man, would be subjecting God to the will of man, which could be perceived or interpreted as a form of blasphemy. So it's not that the secret teachings are actually a teaching that was created by man per se, but they are preserved by those men and by the few women, although there were some women, but by the few women over thousands and thousands of years as a preservation of the laws of nature, where, again, they're not created, they're fundamentally there. When you're born, you have those rights, but they're not given by God or government. They are natural rights. It is common law. It is something that is granted by birth, not your right to happiness or wisdom or knowledge, but your right to pursue knowledge, your right to pursue wisdom, your right to pursue happiness. And anything that you pursue is granted by those secret teachings, I think. And in the process of pursuing whatever you are pursuing, be that for selfish and malevolent means, or selfless and benevolent means, you can utilize such information for the latter or the former. You can use that hammer offensively or defensively, or you can use that hammer to create, and you can use that hammer to help. So I don't necessarily think that anything that you and I have discussed tonight, whether or not you agree or disagree with what I've said, or any of the listeners agree or disagree with anything you or I've said, or but both of us have said collectively, I think it's interesting to look at information in that way, and to look at the secret teachings, the mystery schools. When you use these types of words, they're not always very popular because I think they've been grossly misidentified since we've had a promulgation of the New Age movement, and we've seen an explosion of interest in ascension and fourth dimension, crystalline earth, and yoga pants and green smoothies and things like that, where people think if they wear a tie-dye shirt, they're going to ascend or something. There's been a huge explosion of that. But the secret teachings are basically rooted, as far as I'm concerned, in natural law. They're rooted in the word. They're rooted in logos. They're rooted in truth, whatever truth might be, whatever you might perceive it to be. And by preserving those secret teachings, by preserving that information, by obeying God, if you will, you are not teaching, you are not preserving a teaching, you are just preserving a natural law, a natural right. And the people that take that information and abuse it, those are the black magicians, and those are the sorcerers. And those are, whether or not you perceive a black magician to wear a robe and a mask or have some type of sacred dagger, that's not what a black magician is per se. Just like a white magician doesn't necessarily have a white robe and wear some type of regalia that makes them look like a wizard. A white magician is somebody who works to the benefit of others and to the benefit of self. Again, between that area of black, white, and gray. The black magician is someone who works to the benefit of only self and to the detriment of others, to disobey God and to destroy rather than create, or obliterate, destroy, obliterate, find some way to pervert and distort and subject others, including God and nature, to their will and to their intent, as opposed to utilizing such sacred concepts to the benefit of everybody, to the benefit of self, and to the benefit of all things, be them animals, insects, or nature, because you're preserving the fundamental laws of nature, the fundamental fabric of what makes us conscious, if you will. And that means the essence of God, in a sense. So that's my belief. It's not negative, it's not positive, it's not offensive, it's not defensive. I think it's a matter of creation versus destruction. It's a matter of using such concepts for creative purposes or for destructive purposes. It's not even about discussing whether this is a battle between good and evil. As a metaphor, yes, but it's not an actual battle unless you allow it to be a battle. And I think that battle is another scarecrow and another layer of protection against the realization of creation and destruction, which are also necessary components of existence. But creation and destruction in their most extreme and polarizing form, I think, is the real basis of the difference between a white magician and a black magician, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you on that. But what I'm really getting at is the alien thing. Like, there's, to me, I do believe now that there are beings that maybe seeded this planet, that seeded the earth. And I don't know if it was through DNA or knowledge, or whatever. Göbekli Tepe is kind of fascinating as well, and all these things that we're finding. But, man, I would hate to think that it was because it's beautiful to think about the rainbows and unicorns, and it's all about consciousness, and we're eternal beings that live forever. And that's the thing, and we just don't understand that yet. But when we learn the real truth and the secret teachings, we're going to learn that we're all these things, right? And that's great, and that's probably true. I mean, deep down inside, I feel like that's true. But some of this stuff shows that there was some kind of, I would say, a darker agenda to enslave humanity, in my opinion. Whether it's Zachariah Stitchin's work, whether it's the stuff that Crowley got into. Even if you look into Scientology, they call them something else, but it seems like there is some kind of race behind all this. You call it a force, but you do admit you don't know what it is, and I'm admitting I don't know what it is either. But it seems like these things, these beings, whatever they are, revealed some of these teachings. Does that make any sense? Like, kind of like in the Book of Enoch.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple ways you could interpret that. One would be going back to that story I told before break where we talked about the initiations in Egypt was the example I gave. And again, from the stories I've read, when you were given the special hallucinatory substance and you were submersed in a pitch black room for 3 days before being resurrected, you had literal communion with those beyond the veil. So you were actually communicating with other spirits, entities, like you were in a dream state, an out-of-body experience, kind of like communicating to beings in the astral realm. So in that case, perhaps that information was given to man by those energies, entities, whatever you want to call them. But that doesn't mean that there aren't aliens that could have come to Earth. And if they did come to Earth, who's to say that they're not still here? I don't know that. And I think that you could probably find evidence to support that, just like you can find evidence to support pretty much anything that you want to find evidence to support. It's just a matter of what you want to believe.
Well, I want to believe in the latter thing that I was saying, and my own experiences have told me that's probably true. But someone brings up, I think Lewis brings up a pretty good point in the chat room. The one thing that I do know is that whatever these beings are in this realm, they're black and shadowy, maybe because we don't perceive them. I don't even know if they're good or bad, but it seems to me like they're bad, especially for children. My son saw one and just freaked out. I thought he was having a panic attack out here, Ryan, but he saw one in the yard and just started crying and couldn't move.
What it like? Did he explain it?
Well, it was when he was younger, but we have this magnolia tree out in the front yard, and he likes to just pick at it and hang on it. And we got out. I walked outside, and I think it was about midnight. And I'm like, "What are you doing out here?" And he was kind of crying. And he actually came on Lighting the Void, which is the other show I do, and talked about it. And he looked to the right of the house. There's a concrete walk on the right side of the house. Mm-hmm. And he looked to the right of the house, and his eyes were affixed, And I imagine I'm standing at the door, staring at him on this tree, looking back towards the house. So he's kind of looking back towards my way, but to the right side of the house. And I'm like, "What are you looking at?" And he couldn't even talk. And he said, "There's something there. There's something there," and he couldn't move. And I ran over there and kind of put my arm around him. He said, "There's something over there." And he was shaking. And I was like, "What was it?" He said it was some black thing. It was looking at me and it ran off, And immediately when he said that, I remembered the stuff that happened to me when I was a kid. Now I saw these beings I don't know if they're the same beings I'm seeing in the astral realm or whatever, but those are blacker than black. I talked to Butch Wachowski when he came on the show about his investigation where he went to a place, and check this out. You're going to find this interesting, where this man had reported these beings out on his place, but he couldn't photograph them until he used a mirror. Then he could get a clear picture of them.
Interesting. Have you ever talked to Linda Godfrey?
Not yet, but I plan on it.
Yeah, maybe I can set you up with her. She's a really great interview, and she's written some really great books. Nick Redfern would be another person that, if anybody's interested, Nick Redfern. And
I'll talk to him.
Yeah, they have a lot of information on those types of things. Her primarily dealing with like dogmen, if you will. That the concept of what you're saying, they're like the dark entities, shadow figures, phantoms. There's a quote by a German mystic that I like. It's his name is Meister Eckhart, and he said, quote, "If you fight your death, you'll feel the demons tearing away at your life. But if you have the right attitude to death, you will be able to see that the devils are really angels setting your spirit free." Right. And the way that I interpret that is kind of like how I interpret a heaven or hell. You can literally create a heaven or hell for yourself every single day, every month, every year, every decade, throughout your entire life. You can create a heaven or a hell. You can create a state of pain and suffering, or you can create a state of ecstasy. And so if you fight death, if you fight against the current of life, then every single experience that's presented to you in the form of probably a hardship that you can learn from such an experience, you might feel as a demon tearing away at your life. But if you have the right attitude towards not only death, but if you have the right attitude towards those experiences, you find that those demons are not really devils. They're actually angels that are setting your spirit free. So in that case, in a more mystical, metaphoric, symbolic, less than literal example, perhaps that's what those entities are. In a more literal form, perhaps those energies, entities, phantoms, perhaps they are actual projections of what we feel. And maybe what we feel are insecurities. They are manifest in a physical form. Not that we're manifesting an actual physical form per se, but the physical form is like an extension of our soul, if you will. And it's being manifest outside the body so that we're terrified of it. I mean, my personal experience, the reason I love that quote by Eckhart so much is because when I was a kid, I gave you just a couple examples of things that I experienced, but I had really dark experiences very, very often. I mean, I would see things coming down the hall towards my room. I could hear whispers. I could hear, sometimes I was physically touched. The worst case, I remember when I was a kid, something grabbed my neck. when I went to the basement, and like I could feel it, but I couldn't see anything. I just felt like I was choking. And then the light bulb at the same time blew out in the basement. I was horrified. I ran back up the stairs. So I had all those types of experiences, and I perceived them as very dark. But as I got older, those experiences turned into really positive things the more that I read and researched and studied and understood what these things might actually be. I don't know, just my opinion. Maybe it's just a projection of us.
Well, my thing is why are they attacking the children? You know, why do we lose sight of these things as we get older? And then it's not until someone like me starts exploring out-of-body experiences and things of that nature, or the occult, until I actually have an experience with these things again. But as a child, man, those things that you're talking about, a lot of that stuff happened to me. I was touched. I was choked. All kinds of stuff happened. Some of it, I don't remember if it was reality or a dream, but it definitely felt real. But why do these things go after the children? You know, and I do understand what you're talking about. I mean, even in Jason Quitt's book, which I'm reading as well, Forbidden Knowledge, I believe in chapter 4, he discusses a dark black being that would stand at the end of his bed that would freak him out all the time. And as he kept experimenting, he learned that this was actually one of his guides. You know.
Yes, that's an interesting perspective. If you start to recognize that those experiences are not necessarily negative, and I think a lot of people are kind of conditioned, I don't know, by family or by friends or by entertainment, to think that those types of, again, for lack of a better word, entities, that they're really negative things, that they're demons, and maybe they are just guides, if you will. And maybe we should start a whole movement if we've had a paranormal experience. #MeToo, Paranormal Edition.
Right, right. The paranormal, but what you're saying though makes more sense. And Nick Redfern explained this to me as well. The Tulpa Forum, or let's take Nick Redfern out. Let's take someone like Daskalos, who was a famous mystic. Mm-hmm. Tells you that we create these things. I believe the great I am is this creative thing. When you get two or more people gathered together and they believe in something, they focus on something, maybe they even write it down, then it becomes a reality. You know, the Hebrews called these things, they could create golems. They talk about it in the Kabbalistic text. Things that we created in this fourth dimensional realm. The problem is we never get rid of them. There's no way, you can only banish them, but they're there. So maybe it's also trying to teach us the responsibility of, hey, sometimes when you create something, you got to deal with it. And not just you, but everybody in your family. You know, the sins of the father return to the son or whatever. Maybe it's something that we need to consider. And Edgar Cayce even said, thoughts are things, which the Reverend Dan Lopez reminded me of the other night. So it's a pretty mystical, crazy world in there. But this is everything we talked about in hour one, to me, leads to this, because if we become distracted by nonsense and become polarized, we're never going to get to the answers of these things that we're talking about right now.
I completely agree with you. If we, as individuals, allow ourselves to think that, or have a preconceived idea of what these types of experiences are, then we are going to experience them as per the preconceived notion of what they are. If we're very open to them, maybe we'll recognize that the demons are actually angels, or we'll recognize that perhaps some of the angels that we perceive are actually demons. Or, as I was mentioning to you before the show, and then as I mentioned, I think we talked about in the first hour, where a lot of these fields of study are so disconnected, but if we reconnect them, they all have a piece of the puzzle. And so, which is I think a cliche analogy at this point, but they really do all have a piece of the puzzle. And so if you were to, from at least my experience, anything I've ever read and researched and watched about paranormal experiences, it's a pretty common theme, although, again, from my experience, it's an actual rarity to find true demon possession. But in all cases of demon possession I've heard of, it's a very common theme to smell sulfur. And even though that's something that's sort of confined to the realm of the paranormal, You also find that in, and I say paranormal in the strict sense of spirits, entities, demons. But then if you bring in by association, let's say the UFO community and alien abductions, which would also be perhaps perceived as the paranormal, but depends on how you look at it. My point is taking the stories of demons and the smell of sulfur and making a connection to alien abductions. A lot of alien abductions, people claim that they, and not that they're saying, hey, just like in a demon possession, people are just saying, this is what I experienced. When I was being experimented on, or when I was sitting and I couldn't move, or I was laying down, I couldn't move, I was in a spaceship, wherever I was, whatever they perceived, wherever they were taken, or maybe it was in their room, but they just perceived reality different. Whatever the case was, they say they also, in some cases, they smelled sulfur. So you got the case of sulfur and alien abductions. You have it in the case of demons. Perhaps the aliens are demons. The demons are aliens. Perhaps they could be angels. There are so many different possibilities that, just like we said earlier, again, it's not that there's a definitive answer per se, but that the information is and should remain fluid, because a case where someone sees or feels that something is possessed by a demon, or there is a demonic presence, there's a difference between a demonic presence and a demon. A human being can personify the attributes of an actual demon, whether that's Apollyon or it's Beelzebub or Asmodeus. They can personify the elements of a demon. And so if you are near that person, let's say that person is displaying all of the classical elements of one of the classical demons, then that person is embodying the essence of that demon. And by performing such actions in life that would associate them with that demon, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, maybe they're just a greedy, nasty, rude, disgusting, violent person, they personify all these horrible elements. They are possessed by a demon. They are caught in a magical bind. They are caught in this frenzied state of uncontrollable and unkempt passions. And so whatever they do, they are personifying. They are emanating that energy. And so that person, and I'm sure that all of you have been around somebody who maybe they're not that terrible, but they emanate something that's just wrong. And maybe they are somebody who is having a really bad day and they have really strong thoughts. Whatever the case might be, though, if you've been around somebody like that, they have a weird energy. And maybe that weird energy extends beyond energy. Maybe in the presence of one of those people, whether they mean to or are aware of it or not, and I know this for personal experience, you can see things that otherwise you wouldn't see, or experience things that you otherwise wouldn't experience, because the emanation coming from that person is perhaps manifesting something elsewhere that you are perceiving, that you are bringing into your awareness because you are within their presence. You are within their energy field, if you will. I don't know. You could take this an infinite number of ways. I'm just kind of ranting, and I don't mean to.
But those are the questions I ask too. Because let's take polytheism and monotheism. Right? When you study the occult, you learn that the old religion, which pagans call it the old religion, right? So it's the old religion, and it's many gods. And then you look into the Elohim. Okay, yeah, there was many gods, and they actually had names and stuff. And then you read the book of Enoch, and these angels came down and mated with, the human race, or so-called angels, or the Watchers, and then they gave away all these magical secrets, alchemical secrets, astrology, and things of that nature. But then they were cursed by God for doing it. And it's like, okay, it's enlightening to learn these fundamentals, but then it's another thing too. There's a whole nother story that says that we're not supposed to learn this stuff. So it's almost like you got to make up your mind. You got to make and I hate even talking about polar things, but it seems like you have to make a choice, right? Are you going to go down this road or not? And when you do, you're kind of stuck there. And if the book of Enoch is literally true, then any of us that practice or study these things could be condemned, And but another thing that just it's perplexing, because they talk about it in the book, is you gave the human race heavenly secrets. Heavenly secrets sounds like a good thing to me.
Well, you know what you would really love, and if anybody listening is following intently along with what you're saying in particular, Joe, you'd really love to read the book I mentioned earlier, The Magus by Francis Barrett, particularly the first half of it, and then even more specifically the first section, so the first quarter of the book, talks about all of this. And in terms of symbolism, I mean, we've already talked about how you can take the laws of nature and define them as God. And so they are God-given laws, God-given rights, the laws of God. And if you follow those laws, you are obedient to God. And if you disobey those laws, you are a blasphemer, if you will. But if you take the idea of God as a concept rather than an entity or some hierarchy as we would traditionally classify certain people above other people or certain angels above other angels, it's not like a man-made humanoid type of hierarchy, I don't think. Symbolically, the different angels or the different emanations of God are just that, they're emanations of one source. So the way that I've seen polytheism is that polytheism is actually, for the most part, and to those that truly were polytheistic in belief, it was actually monotheism. The average person might have believed in different gods, but the true polytheist believes in one God. And what I mean by that is polytheism is just a very complex form of monotheism. All the different emanations, the different gods and goddesses are different, sure, and they are to be respected in their own realms, but they are also just branches. They are just elements of the one true source. So there is one source with infinite emanations, and we are all also emanations of that one source. So by breaking from that source, which is a necessity in order to live the life we are living, to experience the things that we are experiencing, to know good and evil, as is the case in the Garden of Eden with the consumption of the apple, which brought about desire, which brought about death, it is to become aware and to be conscious. To be made aware that you are naked and to cover yourself is to be made aware of good and evil, to be born, to be consciously aware. We are born naked and we are immediately covered. So in that sense, it is a necessity that we must experience that suffering, but through that suffering can also be brought pleasure. Through one experience can be, in the polarized world we live in, can be implied and experienced the opposite experience, and then we can create a heaven or hell out of that. So I think the case of being punished to experience these things it's not really a polarizing argument, I'd say. I mean, I know what you're saying, and I'm not really agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just looking at it from a different point of view. It just, to me, it sounds like a symbol. It sounds like a concept, like God is giving you these things, but it's not a anthropomorphic God. It's God as a concept, and we're all part of that, and each emanation is just a part of God, and so we're all part of God, and the nature of existence is itself a part of God, and all of the laws are a part of God. God is a concept, not an anthropomorphic being, and if there is an anthropomorphic being, it's maybe anthropomorphic's not the right word to use, but if there is a humanoid character, it's you, made in the image of God, which is in the Zohar. And in sacred Judaism, and the mysticism is the seal of Solomon, the white God looking upon the reflecting pole to see the black God. That is the white and black, the dualism in unity. And that is the reflection of man, or the reflection of God in man. So man was created in God's image. That's how I see it.
Well, it could be, the upbringing I had that bothers me about it, because I was brought up not to even play with things like this, and then when I had Leo Zagami on, he said, in his voice, be careful, you're leading a magical movement, Joseph, and, Leo is a protector of a certain, I would say, fundamental concept. And, he wants to make sure that certain things don't get tainted, right? Like that's what he's all about, and revealing a lot of that stuff. And, I just think when Manly P. Hall warns people about ceremonial magic, and I think he does it it's so contradictory because he warns of it, but then he talks about it all the time. So I think he warns of it because maybe there's an aspect, maybe there is a dark side of this that you can easily fall into, and that probably goes back to your discussion about, left hand, right hand path stuff, where you become megalomaniac or you actually want to serve humanity.
Well, yeah, that's like the Pythagorean why.
Right.
Go ahead.
But everybody says that, oh yeah, if I learned how to, manifest things, or if I learned how to read astrological charts, or if I learned how to divine through whatever, or if I actually learned how to do spells that were real, I would definitely only heal people, and I would definitely do everything for the good of humanity. Right. Well, I hear you. But, there's demons you can call on that'll, put money in your pocket if you make a deal with them. So if you actually do learn these things, I'd like to know how many people would really stick to that, because everybody says they would do this or that until they're presented, till it becomes real. Wait till it becomes real. Wait till, I can give you a lottery ticket. You're going to win $1 million, but you got to do this. There's a lot of people that I think are all talk and would just end up doing it anyways.
It takes a lot of conviction, a lot of strength, and a lot of will. And that's one of the most important elements of magic is will. You can have the intention, but unless you have the will and the actual belief, the intention doesn't go as far as the will or the belief that you will accomplish what you choose to or what you desire to accomplish in a ceremonial form of magic.
Right. And I talked to a magician, Frater Ashin Shasan, who also validates another theory of yours about angels where, people invoke spirits. You remember when I told you a minute ago about how this guy saw these entities through a mirror, and I was going to get to that. I was getting to a point, but he said that he could manifest them in physical form. Like he spent his entire life studying magic. He's wrote his own books, and he's seen these entities in physical form. And he said that the angels are the most powerful and terrible things he's ever just saw. Like they'd bring tears to his eyes or bring him down to his knees, and not necessarily these beautiful unicorn-like beings that everybody thinks.
I've heard that before, too. I've not really heard much about it, but I have heard that in passing before.
Pretty intense stuff. And, he sounded legit to me, and he's dedicated his life to it. But,
well, see, that's been polarized, like you said, too, because when you think about angels or demons, we tend to have these concepts like an angel is this angelic being with flowing white robes and a halo and wings, and a demon has maybe a pitchfork or some nasty distorted face, and they've got some red clothing on. But those are the attributes that we give them that are very literal in nature. I think a real demon, in fact, again, the book that I'm reading, I'm almost finished with, the Magus, and I have some symbol books too where the same symbols are in there. There's images of what people have conjured in terms of demons, like Asmodeus was one of the ones that comes to mind. And the demons do not look evil. I think Apollyon, in the case of what I'm looking at, these pictures, Apollyon was one of the only ones who looked very weird. The rest of them just look very normal. They almost look like humans. And that's kind of the point that I was making, is that most of the elements of what we consider to be demons, we can manifest them ourselves. So if you're somebody who is very loving and very caring, and maybe you are loving to a child, or you're loving to your wife or your husband, or whatever the case is, you're embodying the elements, the concept, and the energy of love and compassion. And so you are embodying the essence of Venus or Aphrodite, whichever you'll have. If you are angry and combative, you are embodying the essence of Aries or Mars. If you are projecting some form of vile hatred towards other people, if you are a murderer, if you are an adulterer, whatever the case is, you are embodying the elements of some of those demons. So you become the demon. And I think that's what is, and it doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It's just my perception is that these things are manifest, sure, but when you're manifesting those entities, I think that often they are a projection of your desire. So again, if you are a loving person, let's say, and you're embodying the concepts of Venus or Aphrodite, and you try to conjure those types of beings, an angelic being, or you're trying to invoke the goddess, you may see something that's very beautiful, but that's a projection of what you desire. And if you desire something that is harmful to others or very selfish to you and beneficial to nobody else, what you evoke is going to be very dark and perhaps very terrifying. And anything else that might be otherwise to what I'm saying, maybe it's not a projection of self. Maybe you're communicating with other entities from other dimensions. I don't know. It's just another point of view.
It doesn't seem rational, does it?
No, it doesn't, because I think we're dealing with several different aspects. We're dealing with like this paranormal element of the projection of self. Then we're dealing with literally other dimensions. I mean, that's a scientifically proven, if you want to use that word, proven fact. Isn't that what mainstream science is about now? Multiple dimensions. Even the Department of Energy says they work in multiple dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think anybody really has the answer to it all. And if they tell you they do, then they're probably going to ask you to pay them a bunch of money so that you can ascend.
Well, yeah, right. And, Lon Malo Duquette says, and he stated many times, that science is actually validating some of the older ancient concepts of magic, which I believe is true.
Yes.
But I also think that it's not just one-sided. I think that science is also helping spirituality. For instance, I'll give you an example. Like I was telling you about with the mirror. Butch Wachowski took pictures of these things, and you can see the entities in the picture. But yeah,
is it a black mirror?
No, it was just a regular mirror, but you had to use a mirror, right? And that's the thing. I explained it to him. I said, well, that's kind of funny because all the magicians knew back then is if you look up the Lemegeton, I believe it is, which is another Solomonic magic book. They did use a black mirror, and they could see certain entities in it. And you would think, well, that's just their consciousness projecting it, right? Well, okay, I get that. But if it is their consciousness projecting it, then how did he get a picture of these things? And he had to use a mirror to do it. It was like there was something there that shifted a door that shone into that realm.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that there is a lot more to it than just projection. I'm only using, and I know you know that, I'm just using the projection element as a basic analysis, just like a base introduction to those concepts. And when I say introduction, I also don't mean to imply that I know more than anybody else. I don't. I'm just saying that I think that there is a lot of, in fact, perhaps as many interpretations as there are people. You can interpret it in any way, and it doesn't mean that you're right or wrong. In terms of those types of things, what you're saying, I mean, I've had experiences with things that I don't think that they were manifestations. I mean, the three experiences I had with what some might call sleep paralysis. Again, I had sleep paralysis, and it was way different than that. Where one time it was really peaceful, it was very neutral even. I didn't feel anything bad. I didn't feel anything good. It was just kind of like being at peace, truly tranquil. And then another time, I hadn't even really gone to sleep. I was just laying there, and I had a horrible experience where I could even, in a way, almost see this blackness just come into the room and fill everything. And it's like the little light that I had went out, and I was just engulfed in darkness. I could feel it pressing down on my body. And again, I was very awake, and I flipped the light on. And I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I flipped the light on, and at the time I was in this bigger office building, and I remember I was feeling compelled to walk to the window. I was just kind of just taking a deep breath and like, whew, let's get that feeling out of here.
Been there before, yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. I go to look at the window, and I'm not exaggerating, or it's not sensational. This literally happened. I looked out the window, and the power box besides the office building didn't explode like a bomb. It sparked, and it just kind of like a flame or something, and the power to the whole building went off, and I could feel that presence rush back in. And then the generator kicked on, and then the presence was gone. But I could feel it like trying to, it's hard to explain. I mean, I'm sure you know, and anybody else who's had that experience, it was like trying to get to me. And it's almost like I could hear a voice, like it wanted to harm me, but it couldn't because I was protected by something. I mean, this was like back in 2012. I was actually, that week I had started writing my first book. and it was like trying to get me, but it couldn't. I don't know that, and I never really talked about that because I just don't really see a need to necessarily until it comes up in conversation. But that was not something that I manifested. That seemed completely external. And I don't mean external like I projected it. That seemed completely external from even this world. It seemed way, way alien. I don't mean aliens like grays. It seemed multidimensional, what some people might perceive to be as a demon. And I don't know, maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was just, I mean, what are we seeing? Like 0.05% of visible light? Yeah. I mean, there are like, well, look at the anglerfish. The anglerfish uses light to deceive other creatures. I mean, this exists in nature. Who's to say that the light at the end of the tunnel is not the birth canal again, or the light at the end of the tunnel is not the anglerfish dangling that light? That there aren't actual parasites that obviously do exist in nature that have attached themselves to the spiritual or the soul or the spirit of man and just feeds off of man like a vampire. I think all those things are very possible and probably more plausible than most of the standardized definitions we have, which are based on very rudimentary forms of analysis.
Right. Speaking of that, there is a book I've brought up many times. It's more of like an essay, and Eric Markham has actually read it too. It's by Manly P. Hall, what the ancient wisdom expects from its disciples. And in the end of that, towards the end of that book, he discusses the mystery schools, the 7 great mystery schools. And this number 7 keeps coming up. Obviously, we can go on about what 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 continents, 7 human body, or, I guess systems. 7 is everywhere in nature. But he talks about the true mystery schools are in the internal worlds where you work on your superphysical body, that no man... that every man that's actually went to the real mystery school knows that it's an internal realm where he met his real master, or whatever he calls it. And all of these schools and temples that we go to on this plane, whether it's a Freemasonic temple, whether it's a Buddhist temple, or whatever temple you walk into, is simply just a symbolic, exoteric form of the real, true, invisible mystery schools. And that fascinated me. And this number 7 comes up. It's even in the Bible, the 7 candlesticks, the 7 churches, the 7 rays that Bailey talks about in Theosophy. And so I wonder, the 7 ancient planets in astrology, basic astrology. And he says these things are all around us, right? Like that the truth seeker will seek and seek and seek for these mystery schools and never see that they're right there on their doorstep, and talks about meeting these superphysical masters. And all this stuff sounds so wonderful and fascinating to me, and I want to go down this journey. And then the 410s come out, and the alien people come out and say, oh, not all of them, okay, but they say these are just aliens pretending to be demons or pretending to be angels, and they're really here to enslave you. And then you're like, nah, well, that can't be true. So I'll go back, and then it talks about, not questioning the master and doing exactly what you're told. And I get so perplexed. It keeps me up at nights, man. I would love to go back out of the matrix and take the wrong pill, sometimes just to go back, but I can't.
Yeah, well, that's what that metaphor is in that movie, is that once you go down that rabbit hole, there is no going back. I mean, unless you plug yourself back in and compromise yourself and become delusional. I don't mean that in terms of like, some new world order, and I'm aware of what the government's doing. I mean, it's obviously in the sense of what we're talking about. Once you become aware of these things, it's almost like an addiction, and you can't get enough. And I think that for whatever it's worth, is really the purpose of what we call life, is to experience and to grow. And I don't know, I find it very natural to always be just curious and asking questions. I think that is one of the most natural things about what it means to be conscious, is to just be curious.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and then there's the other people that go, man, I know exactly what you're talking about. This is this, and this is that, and this is the name of this alien race. And they got all the answers for everything. And I'm thinking, how is that possible? How do you know all of these things that you can't prove any of it, but you know it all? right? I don't consider, I mean, I have a Southern vernacular, but I don't consider myself to be an idiot, and I've studied quite a bit. And I couldn't tell you the name of maybe 2 alien races. So,
yeah, I'm the same.
So I'm just supposed to trust what you say or your insider. Sorry, I can't do it unless I experience it for myself. And I think that's what we all need to understand. And that's why I'm trying to bring science and spirituality together. I think they both can help each other.
I think they can too, and I think that both science and spirituality are really one and the same. Like you said earlier, science is beginning to demonstrate in the modern age what occultists knew thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago. I mean, whether it's the placebo effect in creating your own reality, and somebody told me once that that's a stupid example because we're talking about science and you're talking about conspiracy theories and occultism and the devil worship. No, it's a concept, and if you can heal yourself by thinking you're receiving medicine when you're not, and your body can heal itself, you can manifest a lot of things. And you can also manifest sickness if you dwell on being sick. You can manifest sickness. You can manifest your own hell. I mean, again, it's based in science. I think a lot of the answers are already there. In fact, all the answers are probably there. It's just a matter of what we can process at one time and what we want to believe and what we're able to perceive and what we have access to. And again, I think that information by itself is very fluid in nature, that there's not necessarily a definitive answer. Maybe to certain things, but to the truth is very fluid. We can experience reality in how many billions of ways. We're all right. We all might have biases, but nevertheless, we still experience things even through those biases. That doesn't make us wrong necessarily, but it doesn't necessarily make us right either. And I think that some things are not based on right or wrong per se. It's just based on the relativeness of the experience and the experiencer.
And this is where people give up, right? And, I've been there myself. They get to this threshold and they go, you know what? We're never going to know all the answers. So this is what I'm going to believe and this is what I'm going to stick with. I'm much happier that way. And, I've been there myself, but I think I just can't help but to keep going down that road. And speaking of going down the road, you've been doing radio for a while. You've authored several books, great books, by the way. I recommend you guys get any of these books. What's next for Ryan Gable?
Well, I have a new book coming out, which is the one that I'm going to be talking about more than the others. I really worked hard on this one, probably more than the others, because I've put together all of the occult information that I have, or at least think that I have, into a massive compilation called Occult Arcana. And I'm going to be talking in this book about symbols, about everything from herbs and stones to filters to spells and curses. It might sound outlandish. It might sound like I'm crazy, but I'm actually just breaking them down by definition, what they mean, as opposed to what we perceive that they mean. So I'm talking a lot about that. And then on my show, I've been using magic and some of the things we talked about tonight in my analysis of either world events or historical events. I like to bring everything together, and I like to do that without having a point to defend, without having any perspective to defend. I just like analyzing things. I like doing the research, and I like constantly finding new things and listening and hearing new perspectives and staying fluid with that information. So that's all that I do. Other than that, I'm just a regular person. I watch hockey once in a while. I like to read a book and take a walk. I like to cook dinner. I do everything that I say that I do. A lot of radio hosts, they'll say that they, don't eat GMOs or don't eat fast, and they do it. But I literally stay bound to what I say, and I would feel like a hypocrite if I said I do something and don't. I try to be as real as is humanly possible in everything that I do. So yeah, other than the book, I just do the radio show several nights a week, weekends and also weekdays. But just for anything that you'd like to know about the show, you can go to www.thesecretteachings.info, facebook.com/The Secret Teachings, or you can email me with questions, comments, or concerns at rdgable@yahoo.com. and also on my website is my archive. I've been doing radio for maybe about 8 years, and in the capacity I'm doing it now for about 5 years. So I've done this a long time. I've been to the conferences. I've met all the big names, interviewed all the big names, the small names, the in-betweens. I think that, as you expressed earlier, it's very frustrating. And so now in the last 5 years, I've just settled into who I am, and that's my success. And I would, to anybody who's interested in these topics, I'd recommend that as well. Just settle in your success and look internally for everything, and look very little to the outside for any type of evidence or proof or truth, if you will. And anything you externally find, internalize it and process it internally, as opposed to just believing it and leaving it on the external.
I'll never forget hearing how much fun and how into Jim Mars was when he talked to you. He was really, not just Jim Mars, but Jordan Maxwell and all of the people that have been in this field for years and are doing hardcore research. When they came on your show, they expressed a feeling of a validation of someone understanding their plight more than I've heard. I've heard them on a lot of other shows too, and I've heard them, be honest, you get a great guest on so you can get a bigger audience, because that guest brings a lot of people to your show. But the conversations that you've had with these people are kind of like the ones that I'd like to have with them. And, I'm very impressed with your work, and I try to model it a little bit. So if you guys want to know how I got Jordan Maxwell on the show, people like, not Leo Zagami, but Sophia Stewart, it was because of Ryan that he introduced me to them. And it was Ryan's integrity. And the reason why they came on my show is because they trust Ryan and his integrity. And I think in radio, that's very important. And it's good to hear that you hold that to a higher standard, because let me tell you, your audience is going to remember every little thing you say,
That is very true. I appreciate the kind words. And I obviously have to thank you, as always, for allowing me to be on the Fringe FM and really finding substance in what I do when most other networks don't want anything to do with me. I mean, for people that don't know, I've been literally kicked off of 3 different networks. I've been kicked off of CBS. I've been kicked out of a very famous college radio station, and I've been kicked out of Dark Matter. And in the case of the latter, I was removed because I refused to censor the content of my show. And other than the L&M radio network, Joseph here has pulled me on to the Fringe FM and allowed me to do what I do unhindered. So I have much appreciation, respect, and love because of that. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, man. It's definitely my honor to have you on there. And the company you keep is good as well, including people that are on that network. And I'm not afraid to say it. I think Michael Vera is all about the truth. Brad Olson's on there as well. Even Clyde Lewis is, kind of looks like Clyde's kind of wrapped his arm around you and respects you a little bit. And that's a lot to say. And I hope that we keep doing this in the future, man, and that radio becomes real journalism instead of sensationalism from here on out. Like you said, I mean, just a month ago, I heard a host criticizing cryptocurrency. Oh, it's terrible. There's no underlying asset. And then a month later, check out our new social media thing. It's all about cryptocurrency. I'm like, what is it? What do you want? I mean, we have to be held accountable as radio hosts too. And it's cool to have you on the network. And I really want everybody to go check out the show, especially during the day. You can catch it live. And how can they catch the archives too, real quick?
Yeah, everything is going to be on the website. There's an archive page with an archive for all the past years at www.thesecretteachings.info. I don't really use social media that much, but there is a YouTube page. You can find some of the older shows, and on occasion I'll put up a new one. There's also a new archive on the website as well, where you can listen to some of the newer shows. But otherwise, live Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, you can email me at rdgable@yahoo.com. I like having conversations. I don't have anybody that screens my emails, so rdgable@yahoo.com. If you have any content, information, questions, concerns, whatever it might be, I'd love to talk to you.
All right, Ryan, thanks for coming on the show again. It's been a real pleasure. Hang out for just 1 second. All right, guys, that's it. We're going to get out of here. Don't forget, if you're listening on the Fringe FM, Spaced Out Radio, or wherever you're listening from, S4 is up next. The live broadcasting continues, so don't go anywhere. We'll see you next weekend with Brett, Colin, Shepard. Good night, guys.
Looking for a path to follow.